start early today. A little levity always helps. It's the hearing. It's called to order. I recognize the president of the quorum of the committee members, council president. This is the public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 170, 195, 170, 196, 170, 197, and resolution number 170, 213. Mr. Stitt, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 170195.
An ordinance to adopt the capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2018 through 2023 inclusive. Bill number 170196. An ordinance to adopt the fiscal 2018 capital budget. Bill number 170197. An ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2018. Resolution number 170213. Resolution providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia of a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia covering fiscal years 2018 through 2022 and incorporating proposed changes with respect to fiscal year 2017, which is to be submitted by the Mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority, the authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this Council approved by the Mayor on January 3, 1992, Bill number 1563-A, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, Mr. Stitt. Today we begin public hearing of the Committee of the Whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2018, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2018 through fiscal 2023. Today we will hold testimony from the administration on the 5-year plan. First person to testify from the administration is
Jane Slusser.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Council President and members of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Jane Slusser, Chief of Staff in the Office of Mayor Jim Kenney, and I'm here this morning to provide testimony on Resolution 170213, which considers approval of the city's 5-year plan for fiscal years 2018 through 2022. I'm joined at the table by Rob Dubow, the city's Finance Director, and Anna Adams, the city's Budget Director, and other cabinet members, commissioners, and department heads are also here to answer any questions you may have. Thanks to your support in last year's budget and 5-year plan, we have begun to make progress towards creating an education system that will give all our students the academic tools to succeed in the workforce through PHL pre-K and community schools. However, our work is clearly not done. Of the 10 largest cities, U.S. cities, Philadelphia ranks first in poverty and last in job creation, 2 statistics that this administration aims to reverse. With a 26.4% poverty rate, we need to continue to push to raise our residents out of poverty, invest in programs that uplift our most vulnerable, encourage businesses and residents to locate and remain in the city, and look to improve our fiscal stability. The key indicator of the city's fiscal health, the fund balance, is projected to account for only about 2% of revenues in FY18 at $87.5 million, dropping to a low of 1.5% in FY20 and 21 before growing to $101.8 million or 2.1% in FY22. These numbers fall far short of the city's target of 6 to 8% of revenues and significantly below the Government Finance Officers Association's recommendation of approximately 16% of revenues. Healthy fund balances provide a cushion against unexpected loss of revenues or increased expenses and improve the city's ability to weather economic downturns. As with previous years, critical investments in programs that will significantly improve the lives of all Philadelphians, both in the short and long term, are weighed against the level of the city's reserves. Therefore, each decision in the FY18 budget and 5-year plan was carefully made, thanks in part to the introduction of program-based budgeting. This year, the administration has rolled out program-based budgeting with 20 departments and will expand to all other departments over the next 4 years. This best practice budgeting tool allowed the administration to focus on data to help inform the recommendations, such as what will this investment do to move the needle on the goals that the program has set? Will this program generate revenue that could partially or fully offset the cost? And how do the operating needs of this program fit with capital investments? With narrow fund balances, the proposed recommendations in this budget and plan are those that we believe are not only urgent and crucial, but are also wise investments that will help improve the delivery of key city services. By and large, they are also relatively modest investments. The key investments of the administration's 5-year plan are centered on protection of Philadelphia's most vulnerable populations. One of the largest proposed investments is in foster families, providing increased funding to enable foster parents to better support the children in their care. By investing approximately $17 million over 5 years in partnership with the Commonwealth, which would contribute approximately 80% of the total amount requested, foster families would receive almost $36 daily for children in their care, up from the current $21.25 per diem they receive today. As the current rate has failed to keep up with inflation, we are hopeful that increasing the rate will not only support existing foster families, but also encourage others that may have been previously unable to become foster parents because of their financial situation. Adding an additional 10 lawyers to the Child Welfare Unit will also help reduce an overly high caseload in protecting abused and neglected children and youth. The plan also seeks to tackle one of the major crises affecting the opioid epidemic. The approximately $7.5 million investment over the 5-year plan will aim to reduce opioid prescribing through a campaign to the highest prescribing healthcare providers, improve the distribution and use of Narcan, the opioid overdose antidote, increase public awareness about the danger of prescription opioids, and develop a real-time database to track openings in addiction treatment facilities. These investments are critical to tackle the huge challenge that led to approximately 900 deaths and thousands of hospital visits attributable to drug overdoses this last year. Homelessness continues to be an issue impacting multiple aspects of the city, from commerce to human services. The administration proposes adding over $1 million annually to the Office of Homeless Services to pay for additional funding for 2 best practice programs. 50 additional families will be able to benefit from rapid rehousing, a proven model that provides short-term rental assistance and services for families that exit shelter each year, as well as an additional 33 units of supportive housing to assist individuals and families with chronic illnesses, disabilities, mental health issues, or substance abuse disorders who have experienced long-term or repeated homelessness. The plan also invests in prevention of childhood lead poisoning, with over $900,000 annually for enhanced efforts on education and enforcement, on top of an additional $230,000 provided for the equipment and vehicles needed for the program's development in FY2017. The major source of childhood lead poisoning in the city is the accidental swallowing of flakes of lead paint, causing serious harm to their developing brains and nervous systems. This investment will help allow the Department of Public Health to remediate lead in 300 homes annually above the 170 homes currently remediated. The city will also have increased resources to hold landlords accountable for exposing children to lead, as well as to increase outreach and education programs to prevent lead exposure. Investments in the Office of Property Assessment are also proposed in this plan. By ensuring that OPA has full staffing levels and consulting resources, the administration will ensure that OPA will be able to continue to conduct annual reassessments with greater accuracy and help to defend the assessments during the appeals process. Investing in public safety programs remains a priority in this 5-year plan and 6-year capital program. To To combat the challenges of the significant rise in EMS incidents over the last 10 years, the FY18 budget proposes adding an additional 5 medic units, including a total of 42 paramedics, as well as an additional 30 firefighters. This will allow the fire department to better respond to emergencies and improve overall staffing levels to achieve better safety outcomes. The department also proposes to add additional safety and training positions, with 4 additional safety officers requested for FY17 and an additional 4 training officers in FY18 for a total of $950,000. These will help the fire department have 2 safety officers available per shift to increase training resources for emergency personnel. $12.1 million is also recommended in the FY18 capital budget for fire department vehicles, replacing some of the old, outdated apparatus. The 5-year plan also proposes an increase in funding to support the activities of the Department of Licenses and Inspections, both directly in its budget and in other departmental budgets. Adding additional funds for demolition of an additional 525 properties annually, as well as $450,000 for professional services contracts, a recommendation from the Special Independent Advisory Commission for crane expertise to develop an inspection program for construction cranes, and purchasing on-call engineering services to assist with collapse investigations. The administration also plans to continue the rollout of Eclipse, with additional resources included in both the capital and operating budgets in both the Office of Innovation Technology and L&I directly. The operating budget also proposes adding 6 service representatives and 4 building plans examination engineers to improve customer service, reducing average customer wait time below 30 minutes and reducing the current plan review time by 25%. OIT's budget also includes additional funding for cyclomedia and LiDAR technology to enable L&I and other departments to make use of these views across Philadelphia of potential unsafe properties that are difficult to view from the ground. The capital program also includes 2 major transformative investments. The program recommends $174 million for the reconstruction and resurfacing of streets, helping the city reach the crucial goal of resurfacing 131 miles of streets annually within 7 years to ensure a state of good repair. The program also recommends $90 million for the transformation of Penn's Landing by connecting the waterfront to Center City. This investment leverages significant state and private funding and not only creates a beautiful civic space and economic hub on the waterfront, but will generate tremendous economic investment with an addition of 2,420 jobs. To further stimulate the economy, the Kenney administration remains committed to continuing to reduce wage and business tax rates to make Philadelphia a more attractive place for businesses to locate and remain and increase the number of jobs. By FY22, the wage tax rate is projected to be under 3.7% for residents and under 3.3% for non-residents, and the BERT rate will be at 6.1% with the first $100,000 of gross receipts exempted from the tax entirely. The BERT rate cuts and changes are consistent with legislation previously adopted by City Council, and these wage tax rates are the lowest since the 1970s. We are excited to propose a 5-year plan and capital budget program with these investments. However, we still have our work cut out for us. As was announced last Thursday, the school district projects a deficit beginning in FY19 and reaching over $900 million by FY22. This significant deficit will require the efforts of all the funding partners and the various stakeholders to produce a solution. Although the district shows a positive fund balance in FY18, the large negative balances in FY19 and onwards will force tough decisions, and we are committed to working with the district and its stakeholders to examine all options available. Additionally, as this body is aware, the city's pension fund is less than 45% funded, and the city's general fund payment accounts for 15.5% of our total projected spend in FY18. The need for reform could not be clearer, and working with City Council and our union partners, we have a plan to get this pension system to 80% funded by FY31. through reforms that include increasing the contribution of current employees with more modest increases for employees in lower salary brackets, and having new employees enter a stacked hybrid that combines a defined benefit plan and 401k type plan, along with continuing the practice of adding sales tax revenue over and above the MMO, and the pension board continually improving the investment strategy to increase returns as well as decreasing fees, the pension board's actuary projects an 80% funded level by FY31. It's also important to talk about some of the challenges in the plan. On April 5th, tomorrow, next Wednesday, the Commonwealth Court will hear oral argument in the litigation challenging the beverage tax. And although we are confident that the court will uphold the order dismissing the plaintiff's complaint, we are being cautious in our approach. The beverage tax pays for the expansion of pre-K, the creation of community schools, and the ability to fund the $300 million in debt service needed for rebuild. There is no backup plan to support these programs without the tax. As the administration has consistently said, and as City Council is fully aware after your thoughtful and lengthy deliberations last year, we proposed the Philadelphia beverage tax because there was no other feasible revenue option. To mitigate the financial risk while litigation is pending, we are placing revenue dedicated to the programs in reserve to be released as soon as the litigation is resolved. This means that we do not plan to begin to borrow for rebuild, and the number of slots for pre-K cannot expand beyond the current 2,000 funded today until after the city wins in court. There are also risks from the Commonwealth and the federal government. The Trump administration's proposed budget cuts would be devastating to Philadelphia, with reductions in federal spending affecting a variety of areas, including low-income housing, emergency management, law enforcement, fire protection, public safety, health programming, and numerous other critical services. As Council has already heard at previous hearings, the changes to the Affordable Care Act could have devastating consequences to thousands of Philadelphians that have finally been able to have access to health insurance, and the critical negative impact on our health services across the city, including our hospital emergency rooms. The threat of a possible reduction in funding from the Commonwealth remains as well, through a variety of Senate and House bills that propose funding restrictions based on our and other counties following of the constitutional requirement that a criminal warrant be provided in order for us to detain individuals on behalf of the federal government. In putting together this plan, the variety of scenarios that could negatively impact our budget were numerous. But until legislation is passed by either the state legislature or Congress, it is impossible to fully predict the impact. The administration has created a rapid response working group that meets weekly to explore these issues, and we will continue to monitor legislation as it moves through Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today, and we're now happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'll start out with a few questions and then turn it over to my colleagues. In the latter part of your testimony, you referenced the litigation and strategies around the sugary drink tax, sweet beverage, whatever we call it. And you talked about what all of us believe to be laudable programs. We're really excited about pre-K and expansion and the rebuild program, community schools. I think the mayor and I think I get to go along to a couple of places, Dobbins. We're going to do a lot of things, bottom line. But there was an initiative that the administration supported in terms of signing on the borrowing, the preservation initiative. It was kind of a council initiative that some of us think is, to a large degree, is equally exciting because it does infuse a level of support for a significant number of, and all know not necessarily be vulnerable population, but if not addressed, they will ultimately be vulnerable in terms of the many houses across the city of Philadelphia that are in disrepair and continuing to decay from a structural nature. So, and then I look in the 5-year plan, it's mentioned like on page 234. So sometimes, we in council, we want to know the priorities of the administration. Is this a significant priority with the administration, because I know it is with us, in terms of the actual implementation. So with that, can you kind of tell me, you know, the revenues, because I asked a question maybe a few weeks ago about what kind of revenues were we collecting on the real estate transfer tax, a tax that's not being challenged in court. Didn't have an answer at the time, and I'm wondering where are we at with that program, and if you can kind of quickly walk me through the timeline on the borrowing and the implementation of that program, which we think is very important. And also, can you talk to me, and I know there have been some discussions about the second phase of that program, which I know Councilwoman Sherelle Parker is very interested in, the potential for borrowing for infrastructure improvement on households at that population that doesn't always kind of falls between the cracks, people that don't make enough money for some of the high-end stuff that's going on in the city, but they are a little above the federally mandated guidelines in terms of getting support from the government for housing, and we wanted to have that low to no interest loan program to help infrastructure and individuals' houses across the city. If you can kind of talk to me about that. I know that's a long question. So.
Two-part.
So I can talk about the time, Rob Duba, Finance Director. I can talk about the timeline for the borrowing, for the affordable housing borrowing and what we're doing in the meantime. So our current schedule is to have the borrowing in July. That doesn't mean that the program has to wait till July. PAID, at one of its recent meetings, passed a resolution allowing us to reimburse costs that we incur now when we issue those bonds, so we can start ramping up the program now, and then we'll reimburse ourselves in July. So it's starting now.
So we're ready to spend, when you say now, are we ready to spend money now?
Yeah, I actually think some spending has already started.
So I guess my question is, are we ready to implement? Because we have to, and I know this is a question that's probably not necessarily in your pay grade, because you're the finance guy, but I guess I'm trying to get a sense of when can people expect support for the actual rollout of a program that can literally address 5,000 households that are on the backlog. And it's kind of unclear. I know there was an issue about the timeline, and you put me at a comfort level when you told me about being able to spend dollars now and get reimbursed at the time of the borrowing, but I guess I'm trying to find out, well, when do we actually start?
I'm Ann Fedulin, Director of Planning and Development. So that program, the Basic System Repair, Adaptive Mod, and Weatherization programs, the home repair programs, are run out of our department. We're currently in the process of staffing up. We have hired several inspectors. We still need inspectors, so if folks are qualified and they're looking for a job, please contact the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. We also have the equipment in place. So the initial, we've contacted about 200 households that were on the waiting list. We're scheduling the inspections now. We anticipate through April, May, June, that over the course of those months, probably in April, because we're ramping up, we'll do an additional 200 inspections. We anticipate by the end of about June, we'll be up to 500. And based on those inspections, hopefully no re-inspections are needed. We can actually start doing those improvements in May.
May?
May.
So May is start time.
May.
All right. So I want to make sure we have scheduled a press conference.
Yeah, we are not, I just want to make sure that we're not waiting for the bond issue. I mean,
Right.
I think we're hoping things move quicker than they do, but we are in the process of getting ramped up. It did require us to get additional vehicles, get additional, equipment for the inspectors, and hire several more inspectors and get all those systems in place, but that has been, that's underway into the point where we can now really start to roll things out.
And what about the contractor side?
The contractor side, we are working with them. We have been meeting with the contractors to see what their capacity would be to increase the contracts. It'd probably be sometime in the summer when we increase contracts, but that's not slowing us down. We're just going to continue to roll through the contractors that we have, and not all of them were at the max capacity of their contracts that we currently allow. So we are going to maximize everybody's existing contract and then can increase, that will probably happen in July when the bonds get issued, the full increase of the contractor amounts of those contracts.
Wait a minute, so what are we doing in May? We have contractors that can start
We
in
have
May?
contracts now, but there's certain limits that, that's a few $100,000 that each contractor can have under contract right now. We expect to be able to expand that, I think, to $1 million once the bond issue happens. But not every contract was working up to that maximum currently, so we are increasing what we can currently in anticipation of increasing further when the bond issues happen.
So you're saying, I guess you're saying that we're not, because we did pass this last year
Yes,
in June.
yes,
So we knew this was coming.
yes.
So you're telling me that we're now not at a point when we have enough contractors to accelerate the program? Because the issue was not just to continue along the same pace. The issue was the infusion of cash would allow us to accelerate this program quite aggressively.
Right.
So I'm hearing, maybe I'm hearing wrong, that you're looking at the contractors that you currently have, some who are not at capacity, but there's a strong likelihood that we will have to get additional contractors and increase the contract.
We've actually talked to, we have an RFQ.
Shouldn't we be
Right.
ready to do that already?
We do have an RFQ that's out on the street to get additional contractors, but we do believe with our contractors we have that they have additional capacity. And so we've been also working with the existing contractors to make sure that when we are able to expand the contracts, that they have what they need in order to grow the capacity with the contractors that we have in place.
All right. So when you come back for your department, I'm going to ask you a little more detail, because I know this is the 5-year plan, so I don't want to get too much into minutia. Mr. DeVoe, with respect to the amount of money collected, because I had asked that question a month or so ago, have we? Thank you, Ms. Fedora.
Sure, thank you.
Hi, I'm Anna Adams. I'm the city's budget director. Transfer tax, are you asking about how well we're doing in total on the transfer tax?
Yeah, it's, we kind of talk about the sugary drink tax, understandably, how much money we're collecting every month.
So we actually have revised downwards our projection on the transfer tax this year, partly through our outside consulting firm, IHS Markit, has looked at, particularly on the commercial side of our real estate transfer tax, is softening in their opinion. We are tracking it pretty carefully, and so we reduced our estimate in FY17 to $232 million. So far it's coming a little ahead of that, but we are still being fairly cautious because of kind of a softening in the commercial market in terms of kind of the transfer between things. So we're not worried yet. We've just reduced our estimate, and so you see that built into the 5-year plan, but it is built into our estimates right now.
So we don't know.
So right now we're assuming that the FY17 will bring in about $232 million in transfer tax, which is a little less than we had assumed when we put the budget together.
Okay.
It's not, I don't think we're worried, but it's just something that we're being kind of aware of as we put the budget together.
And it's not impacting our ability to do the borrowing, because the borrowing's actually guaranteed by all the city's revenues, not just this tax. This tax just enabled us to do it by providing additional revenues, but that won't have an impact on when we do the borrowing or the size of the borrowing.
All right, okay. I'll come back later and ask about why we think the market, because in most people's eyes, the market is booming, particularly on the residential side, but I'll come back later on. Can't park in my neighborhood because it's like all these people keep moving in, it's exciting. Real quick, I ask this one last question, turn it over. Tax liens. On page 274, it details the Department of Revenue's plan to securitize delinquent tax revenues. Revenue will complete a tax lien securitization program designed to accelerate payments to the city, change the behavior of taxpayers, to increase the percentage of real estate taxes collected within the year due. Got a couple of questions around that. One is, how will this potentially impact the land bank? As you know, there's been some concerns about the land bank's process as it relates to the Department of Revenue, and I don't want to get into that as we're in an upbeat mood. But there is a challenge as it relates to the Revenues Department, perspective of how we should do this versus the council. And in terms of our current process, what prevents us from collecting the same manner as the individuals who will purchase our liens? I mean, is there a reason why we're doing this? And I'm assuming there is, because we're looking at doing it. But can you tell me what within our internal department limits our ability to do this?
Yeah. So let me take the first part. So the wording there really should have said we're considering doing taxing securitization. We've gone through an RFP process, looked at a variety of proposals, and one of the things that we're looking at specifically is making sure that vendors build in the kind of protections that taxpayers have now, and that we're still able to do the kind of work that we're doing with the land bank. As you know, we're kind of we have a tentative MOU between finance and the land bank. I think technical staff for council is looking at it. We want to make sure all that is protected, so that's part of the process, and part of the reason that we're not finished yet with the process is making sure that we have all of that sorted out.
The land bank MOU?
Yeah.
Because that's not been concluded.
That's right. I think what I said is that your staff's looking at.
Before we start passing the MOU to a private sector, we probably need to internally figure out how we're going to do that.
Right, but what we want to make sure is that whatever is in that final version of the MOU is something that is still protected if we move into a tax lien securitization.
Okay. And what role will we have in that, i.e. council? Because we don't apparently have a role in revenues decisions and what they're doing, because we get these MOUs and agreements and people basically blow them off and continue with the tax sale.
So I think that's part of what's in the MOU, making sure that there's a role for the land bank in picking out properties that they're interested in and making sure that those don't go to sheriff's sale, correcting the problem, the really communication problem that led to the sale of those 20 properties. So that's part of what is supposed to be built into the agreement. It's part of the reason that we're having technical staff look at it to make sure they're comfortable with it too.
I'm sorry to keep belaboring the point, but this is my first opportunity to get you in a public discussion about this.
Yeah.
How are you going to do that and ensure that the land bank, in terms of their interest in getting properties and putting together developable parcels and the whole 9 yards, will be in a position to have that beyond the MOU, because MOUs apparently don't mean a whole lot in some instances.
So, and one of the big things is making sure that there's one spreadsheet that lays out what should be held. I think part of the confusion was there were multiple spreadsheets moving around and people didn't see the final version of the spreadsheet. So just that kind of process change, I think, will have a big impact in making sure that you don't see that kind of thing happen in the future.
All right. I don't want to abuse my privilege of having the mic. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. And welcome. I know you look
Thank
forward.
you.
I know you look forward to this every year.
All year.
All year. Just can't wait. And thank you to all of the professionals from the various departments that have joined us today. This 5-year plan is a work in progress, moving target, always. I'm excited about some of the priorities, Ms. Slessor, that you are representing from the Kenney administration, whether you're talking about more firefighters or more bids for needy people. Those are great endeavors. What I really want to focus on in my time of questioning is, in this 5-year plan, have we accounted for the Trump effect? And is there a plan B? And the reason I say that is, from my calculations, from direct grants, we're in jeopardy of $67 million direct. Sanctuary city holdbacks might be another $1.6 billion. And then from SB 10 from the state, we have no idea what that means by way of state reimbursements in the area of DHS, health, and other things that we get reimbursed from by the state. So my question becomes, out of, and not to mention the state is talking about a $2 billion projected deficit. So I know we have our stuff together, which is encouraging. I'm excited about the fact that the city of Philadelphia seems a lot more stable than some of our federal and state partners. But the question becomes, if Christmas doesn't come, what do we do on Plan B?
So I think that goes back to the rapid response group that we have meeting regularly, whether it is in response to proposals around sanctuary city defunding or really in the Trump budget blueprint that was proposed 2 weeks ago. As we saw with the attempted repeal of ACA, sometimes things don't go according to plan. So we are constantly assessing the impact of what those budget cuts would mean or what certain pieces of legislation would mean, what legal avenues we have to fight back on some of that, particularly around sanctuary cities, and then looking through the Trump proposed budget cuts, identifying cuts, talking with our lobbyists about what's most likely, talking about funding that we receive that is also very important to Republican districts, and that might be less likely to end up on the final chopping block, and really just continuing that constant reassessment. But there are in many areas where a cut from the federal administration is something that the city, with our fund balances, with our revenue projections, would not be able to supplement or make up for out of our own budget. So that's something that increases the importance of us lobbying against having those cuts happen, and requires us also reaching out to other folks across Pennsylvania who would be equally hurt by those cuts and just fighting back on those.
So our city solicitor did a real good job of preparing us for having to deal with a reality of the Trump effect. I probably would not have asked this question today, Mr. President, had Jeff Sessions not stood up and warned us that they're serious about it. When you and the administration briefed us about the possibility, I have an opportunity to go up to the state and deal with our counterparts in PCCD, and they aren't even planning for the fact that we might get hit with loss of Tiger grants, CDBG, LAHI, law enforcement assistance such as bulletproof vests, DNA, not to mention reentry, and what happens to DHS and others if they really tighten the screws and make us not whole for the assistance we give young people by way of foster care. So, sometimes I don't take certain threats seriously because people threaten, but, we can't help but, I was encouraged that we were able to defeat the affordable care slashing, but that does not mean we will be able to stop him on sanctuary cities. So as we start to look at this, I just want us, let's hope and pray and our legal strategies work, our coalitions with other Republicans that are moderate and impacted by this, because sometimes people don't understand Obamacare. They didn't like it. There was a skit where they said, we don't like Obamacare, but we love affordable care, not knowing the two were the same. Sometimes people vote against their own interests. So we have to be prepared here to look at that. And I see Rob DeBoe and Ms. Adams aren't smiling, so I'm assuming we are planning for that. Rob?
Yeah.
So we are, and as Jane talked about, we have this group that meets every Monday to kind of figure out what's happened during the last week and how to respond to it. At the same time, because there are so many different options for the way it could play out, you don't have any kind of specific plans. And, in some of the worst case scenarios, there's no way local governments can compensate for what the federal government's talking about.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Councilman. Mr. DeBoe, $7.4 million is the 0.1% percent increase in real estate transfer tax. So that's my capable assistant.
You just calculate the 0.1.
Yeah, he's good. 7.4 million, so that's the additional dollar. That was the question I was trying to get.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I think we thought you were asking how's the projection coming in compared to that, but
Well,
got
I was
it. Now I
talking about
understand.
the house
Okay.
preservation program, so
Got it,
I
okay.
assume you knew. I was talking about that money that was raised as a result of that. But thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. Good morning. My initial line of
Morning.
questioning is also similar to some of the questions that Councilman Jones raised regarding some of the issues and concerns we have at a federal and state level. I know it's hard to prepare for the challenges that are being discussed both in DC and also in Harrisburg, but I guess one of my concerns is that as we prepare for this protection of the city, and you talked about a rapid response team, I looked in the budget and brief, and I saw that on page 70 of the budget and brief, the law department's budget for, purchase of services has been reduced by about $1.2 million compared to last year. And I understand that was probably done putting together the budgets in the fall, but with this current administration and some of the issues that have been raised by Councilman Jones, is that number going to be enough to deal with some of the legal issues we're going to have to deal with going forward from an SB 10, from an SB 76, some of the stuff that Attorney General's talked about? Are we going to have enough dollars in the city budget to have legal support through the purchase of services? Because I see a lot of litigation issues potentially on the horizon. Although we don't know what the total amount may be, do we have sufficient funds to prepare for that?
So one of the things that the Law Department has been doing, and that the Mayor's Office and Policy and Legislation and Intergovernmental Affairs has been doing, has been reaching out to other cities as well. So when we talk about some of our legal defense, part of that might be in concert with other cities, some of them who may or may not have more money in their coffers that we're able to tack on to a group of cities. You've seen that we've filed various amicus briefs that were from litigation started on behalf of other cities, states, or counties. The current contract that we have around sanctuary cities and I can ask the law department to come up, or I can get you the information later about the name of the firm, is about $20,000, and we have another firm that's doing some work pro bono. So one of the things that has been inspiring for us and helpful to our budget is the number of lawyers and law firms that have wanted to step up to be able to offer their services, and the ways in which we've been able to join with other cities in those efforts. The only other thing that I would flag that might be an issue in that budget line item was the additional funding that we got on the Philadelphia beverage tax litigation, which came in with some outside support from the Arnold Foundation to support our litigation costs, and has allowed us to have some savings there. So,
yeah, I wanted to follow up regarding this rapid response. And is that a city-only type of initiative? Or recently I was in D.C. for the National League of Cities Conference, and that was actually the week that the president came out with what is called the skinny budget, and saw the significant cuts and almost elimination of community development block grants, a lot of other programs that a lot of jurisdictions around the country really depend upon. How is the city coordinating with other large cities, either through National League of Cities or even in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through the County Commission Association of Pennsylvania? How are we coordinating those efforts? Is that on a monthly basis, twice a month? And is there any organizations that collectively we can work together? I know the Attorney General's Association, a number of Attorney Generals came together for litigation early part of this year. What type of initiative do we have to get some more context on this rapid response?
yeah, so there's definitely action happening at the city level, and that tends to go through our lobbyists who represent a number of other cities. So we're able to pick up the phone and understand what is New York City doing, what might Pittsburgh be doing around this, and get a sense of large cities and other cities within Pennsylvania. And I think that we've also been ramping up our efforts to reach out to other local municipalities, particularly around sanctuary cities through the managing director's office and through the law department. They've been reaching out to talk with other counties that didn't even know that they were designated as a sanctuary sanctuary city, but understood that they had the same constitutional requirements for criminal warrants that we do. So it has been issue by issue, and it has also been increasingly trying to coordinate better with them to respond to these things in a more, I think, organized way as we start to understand how things are coming, particularly out of Washington and to a lesser extent out of Harrisburg, and how we can respond to that. I think that looking at cities nationwide, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors at the beginning or middle of January, it was the few days before the inauguration, I don't think that they had no city had a really good plan about how they were going to respond to this or coordinate with others. And 2 months, from that point in time, there's a better level of coordination, and I think that the city has been trying to ramp that up so that we know what other people are doing as quickly as possible. Going back to also sort of communication with council members and communication with our federal delegation, that's also been something that as soon as we have something new coming out, we try to identify what are the facts around this. When proposed budget cuts come through, how do we actually interpret that in the city budget in terms of direct and indirect cuts? And I think the administration reached out to let everyone know that we were getting that together, still waiting through that, also figuring out what's the impact of those cuts so that if we know something is a couple $1 million, how many hundreds of Philadelphians are impacted by that and in what way?
And I'll just close on some additional questions. I just think that going forward, because this is a very unique threat to the city of Philadelphia, and we need to do the best job that we can to coordinate all of our efforts, both at the local, state, and federal level, and also other organizations like U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania, have a lot of resources that we can kind of communicate on a regular basis with all these different entities. I hope that we'll be doing that going forward with City Council. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. With respect to the rapid response team that Councilman Green referenced, can you maybe include a staffer or a member of council on that? Because ultimately we will have to change appropriations if in fact we need
Yeah, and for most, what we've been doing so far has been trying to reach out as quickly as possible after new issues. So when we say rapid response group, there's one group that meets regularly around immigration. There's a completely different group that we convene around healthcare, a different group that we convene around housing cuts. And so sometimes that happens so rapidly. Yeah.
The sooner we know that
Yeah, exactly.
if the rapid response team makes a recommendation to change some appropriations, the better.
Exactly.
That's all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think at least the first thing I'd like to say is the issue of defunding the city is bipartisan. We have Democrats who are voting for and supporting defunding Philadelphia. In the General Assembly, Democrats from Philadelphia have voted for defunding the city, sanctuary city, and Democrats have abstained from voting against it. I just want to make clear to people that we had better focus on all the elected officials who are supporting defunding this city. In terms of the budget, is it true that the health commissioner has stated that he intends to deny 1,500 or 1,700 cigarette licenses? I don't know.
Morning, Councilman.
Good morning.
Just to clarify what these tobacco regulations are about, as you know, the smoking is a big killer in Philadelphia, responsible for, by one estimate, 2,000 deaths, another 3,500 deaths. And we have about twice as many retailers per capita as other cities. And retail outlets are the primary way the tobacco industry markets to people these days to market smoking. So the regulations would simply put a cap on the number of retailers, and in neighborhoods where the number of retailers is very high, not issue new permits. So all existing permittees could, as long as they stay within the law, continue to renew their permits, but it would not allow new permits in neighborhoods which are predominantly low-income neighborhoods to have extraordinarily high densities of outlets.
Would that number be 1,500 or 1,700 licenses?
It ultimately, and this may take over a period of years, through attrition, it may come down about that number, yes. Which would
Okay.
then put Philadelphia in about the same number of retailers per capita as other major cities.
According to my estimate, the city would estimate that to be a loss of $45 million per year. The school district estimates that to be a loss of $29.76 million per year, if that were done.
Yes, what's that loss from? You know, there's a lot of economic impacts of
It would
smoking
be-
itself. And
Yeah, it would be 60% of the existing 2,800 licenses in the city. I'm not arguing
You're calculating based upon the permit fees?
about the $2 per pack cigarette tax that the state authorized the city to implement to fund the schools. That's what I'm talking about.
So the state also, I think when it increased tobacco taxes statewide, also added new legislation that guaranteed the school district that it would get $58 million a year. So regardless of what happens with these licenses, the district will get that $58 million.
Provided that legislation continues.
Yes, under existing legislation, the district would get that $58 million.
So have you calculated that in the budget?
I think the school district's budget will assume the $58 million, yes.
So the school district's budget is going to estimate $58 million per year from the cigarette tax, and the city's contribution to the schools, which has actually been the cause of our a number of our tax increases, that doesn't come into play in the city's budget.
Correct.
Okay. My concern is that when I understand that new license will not be granted, that would mean that we would not grant a license to a newly established business. However, what I understand is that existing businesses, when they apply and they are late, their application is now deemed a new application and in some cases denied, and that a business that is existing, should it sell to someone else, their application would be a new license, and therefore those applications, if we're looking at 1,500, would run the risk of not being approved, so though they could not sell those licenses. I'm sure to your purpose of better health. I'm not arguing the health issue. I'm trying to look at the money issue.
Yeah, as far as the timing of this, businesses are asked to renew their permits each year by November 1st. Because of this deadline coming up, we notified businesses this year through letters in October and December that they needed to put in their applications by January 1st. There were many that did. There were a few that didn't. Because of this concern about the fact that this was a new regulation going into effect, we have now extended the deadline for them to put in their initial application up until February 15th, and that could be the initial application, and they can complete it until the end of March. So we think that these people have had now many months beyond the original due date, and so that all of them that are interested in renewing their permits have had an opportunity to do so. As far as the issue of transferring tobacco sales permits, that's something which is in the Philadelphia Code, that a business cannot sell a permit.
Yes.
So if a business goes out of business and a new business wants to come in, that is a new permit.
Yeah.
If we were to change that and allow businesses to sell their permits, then we would forever be in the situation where our number of places marketing
Yes.
tobacco is so much higher than other big cities.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm really just talking about money right now. So thank you very much. I hope I'm not out of time. Am I out of time? Okay, they're going to give me a little bit. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you.
So the next question is regarding the $83 million for SEPTA. And I fully understand that SEPTA needs to leverage that money to get their state and federal contributions. I will say that we have tried in this body over many months to try to get SEPTA to implement an optional local hiring preference as allowed by the U.S. Department of Labor. We have received incorrect responses back and basically a failure to try to put in a local hiring preference. The end result may be that SEPTA chooses to hire whomever they do, but they have ordered their trains from Massachusetts, which may be fine, but if we had a local hiring preference option, perhaps the Philadelphia manufacturer and their 350 workers and 5,000 vendors might have had an opportunity better than what they have. Why don't we leverage, since we're talking about the General Assembly and the administration cutting off our funds, why do we not leverage our $83 million better so that we had a little more say with SEPTA, particularly when it comes to improving the Philadelphia transportation infrastructure as opposed to building infrastructure outside our city?
So the SEPTA, the contribution that we make to SEPTA in the operating budget is heavily matched by...
I know, so we should be heavily leveraged.
And so if we sort of reduced our contribution, which I don't think has ever happened before, it would mean that all the other counties would also, and the state would also reduce
I
their...
think that's a good idea, Council President. I think we need more representation on the SEPTA board. We have so little representation. If we don't give our portion of the money, it affects the entire region that is running our transportation system, SEPTA. But I think it's a good idea, but is that not a good idea?
I think we strongly believe in the importance of funding SEPTA. Partly the need is pretty high for a variety of communities around the city to be able to have access to public transportation.
Thank you very much. I'm being told to move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Dunham.
Thank you, Council President, and good morning.
Good morning.
I think I want to cover in this round at least the three biggest issues for me, which are Sanctuary City, the pensions, and the fund balance. And so one of my questions on the pension, and I'm in total support of getting the pension fund fixed, getting us to 80%. Of the 15.5% of our $4.3 billion, which will be needed for pensions, once it's funded at 80%, what is the 15.5 reduced to?
So if you look out, the contribution peaks probably in about 27, 28, and then it starts to go down. But I don't know what our full budget will be then, so I can't tell you. It would be significantly lower than 15.5%, though.
Well, see, what I'm trying to get to is we have a dangerously low fund balance. Dangerously low. And this is an example of why we shouldn't have a fund balance this low of what's going on in the country right now. Our fund balance, as Jane Slusser commented, is it 87.5 million, I believe, in the document? And you say it's the key indicator of the city's fiscal health. And it really should be 6 to 8%.
Correct.
So it really should be $240 to $300 million.
Right.
And my question is if we can get in 13 years this pension funded properly, of the 15.5, does that drop to 10 so those extra 5 points can go towards fund balance?
So, yeah, I mean, look at the other way. Before this, if you look 10, 15 years ago, it was 7% when we were funded about 77%. So I don't know whether it would stay in that same proportion, but assuming it did, you'd have another 8%.
And is there any way to review the fund balance, realizing to break it down, somebody who makes $50,000 a year, you're going to have $1,000 in savings. That's what we have in the city of Philadelphia. That's our percentages, which is pretty dangerous. Is there any way to build that up? I know that we're fighting for money all over the place, but why don't we set a goal of having a higher fund balance?
We do have a goal of a higher fund balance. I mean, each year when we put the budget together, we're looking at trade-offs between investments that we think are crucial and building the fund balance. So I think that's really the reason it's not higher, is that we need to make investments too.
My last question for this round. This has to do with, and I know it's normally not done in government where we set goals. But I believe we should set goals over the next 5 years, 3 specific goals, which tie into your third paragraph in your testimony, which says we're first in poverty and last in job creation. We should set a goal over the next 5 years of trying to figure out, as a team together, how do we take 100,000 people out of poverty? How do we create 100,000 new jobs? And how do we bring 100,000 new residents to the city? And work together with government and business to accomplish those goals. That to me would be a success of this city if we accomplish that. And all this stuff is good, but those goals are the key. And hold ourselves accountable to achieving those goals. Something that we don't normally do. We need to be accountable for what we do. You guys prepared to work on that? Is that a commitment you're going to work on that?
Yes, we will work on that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. That response was too quick. You need to hold them to that. Set up a meeting for tomorrow. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to each of you. Let me start, Mr. President, by saying thank you for opening up with the issue of the realty transfer tax and what that, aside from the $60 million investment relative to the BSRP's backlog, but that $40 million and what it means to those neighborhoods who have now been coined with the sexy term of middle neighborhoods. But fortunately for us, we've been acting on putting tools into the toolbox that can assist that community for many years. And with that in mind, I want you all to just help me with a question that has been coming up as we just completed our second in a series of 7 budget briefings and town hall meetings throughout the 9th Councilmatic District. Out of the $4.3 billion in general fund revenues, you note that 18.5% of those are collected from real property. And when people see this, they have asked, where are the residential real estate taxes collected in the city of Philadelphia? And the reason why this question comes up is because when we talk about issues like tax lien securitization and or people see the sexy charts noting the total amount of delinquent property taxes that are owned in the city of Philadelphia, they begin to say, why aren't we collecting all of that money and making investments in crucial programs relative to streets, L&I, CLIP, SIP, and things like that that matter to these communities? So with that being said, has the administration worked with Revenue to ever develop a chart or some, here you have for us, we see very clearly that real property represents 18.5% of revenues. Out of that 18.5%, do we know how much is commercial, how much is residential? And of that is residential, how much of that, particularly from the perspective of that which is delinquent on the residential side, how many of those homeowners are actually in payment agreements right now? They have arrangements. How many of those who are delinquent, when we start talking about a dollar amount, how much of that is actually uncollectible? So I guess I'm saying that to say the data and the numbers in and of themselves don't tell the entire story. Is it possible for you to put that data together for us so we can report it to the community?
Yes, we will put that data together. The last piece, what's collectible and uncollectible, is a little bit of an art, in determining that. But so we'll have conversations with you too about how to frame that.
So, and that's extremely important, because if you see the chart in the Enquirer or the Daily, and you look at all of these taxes that, are delinquent, and it looks as if the city is just simply leaving that money on the table, that makes a disciplined taxpayer in the city of Philadelphia very frustrated when they think we're leaving dollars on the table.
And one thing we'll show you when we do that is both that the collection rate on property tax has gone up. It's over 93%. So the vast, vast majority of people pay on time. And we'll show you that the amount outstanding has gone down substantially in the last year as we've made progress in collections.
Okay, thank you. Second question is relative to the fund balance. Now, I looked where you sort of give us a 5-year overview, and I read your comments when you noted, sort of a goal 6 to 8%. But you also look at GAO, and I think, did you say 16%? That's what they recommend? And Rob, I guess this is really for you, because I think you have the longest staying power out of the panel.
I don't know whether that's a compliment.
That is a compliment. That's institutional knowledge, Rob. Tell us when, Rob, when you sort of taking a stroll back through history, when would you say, during what era was our fund balance the healthiest? We have 5 years that we've been looking at. If you went, is it a 10-year span or a 15-year span? Have we ever been at that 6 to 8%?
So while I was here, I think the highest fund balance was at the end of the street administration at about maybe 270, 290 million. And the total budget was probably around 3.6, 3.7 then. So I think that's probably the highest percent. Still not where the GFOA is,
right,
but kind of right or closer to where our internal targets are.
What you're saying is the 6 to 7%.
Yeah.
Important. If you can, again, we see 5 years and what you have given to us. If we could sort of take that stroll back, because it shows us when we were healthy, and we can put into context 08, 09, recession, greater demand for services and all of those things.
What we could do, if it would be helpful, is kind of do while Pike has been in place, that gives enough history of what fund balance has been each year and what our revenues were, so what fund balance was as a percent of revenue by year.
Final question for this round is, I want to talk about the investments in neighborhoods that people have witnessed. As we've gotten through the second meeting, and again, we have 5 more to go, the greatest sort of round of applause and excitement from the public comes when we start talking about the investment in streets department, the actual resurfacing of their streets, when we begin to talk about L&I, demolition of vacant properties, potential for more inspectors to do work that helps to stabilize areas, and when we talk about CLIP and the storefront improvement program. Tell us, if you will, relative to SIP and CLIP, have we developed some sort of rubric that will determine how much of an investment that this will make into actual neighborhood commercial quarters? And we'll get into that when commerce comes, but from your perspective, I'm talking about the 33 degree level, sort of tell us about it.
I think we do have, the storefront, SIP being Storefront Improvement Project, I just want to make sure I understood the acronym. I think we do show in Commerce's budget a little bit about kind of their goals around some of the commercial corridors and Storefront Improvement Program. CLIP also has specific goals that they put in the budget, and so you can see all of those in the 5-year plan, but I think probably their expertise would be more helpful in answering kind of where they are going, what they're doing next, and their plans forward.
So let me just add, I hope you heard the message in that when you talk to the public, making investments in tangible things that when they can see their actual tax dollars at work in their respective neighborhoods. Lofty policy goals, extremely important to them, but they get a chance to feel what it's like to drive down a smooth street and not have their, tires ruined. So, and I'm trying to just hint, CLIP, SIP, streets, L&I, we're trying to talk, okay? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman, I just want to, for the record, when you talked about, I guess, the street years when there was this significant fund balance, it was in large part due to Brown, Blackwell, and Greenlee, who were also members of the council during that period of time. So you guys got to get credit for that too. All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
Thank you, Council President.
You're welcome.
Good morning. I think it's still morning here, right? So this is truly the favorite time of the year for me, right? I love the budget process, and I think this is where we all earn our money because, you know, we have the opportunity publicly with public involvement to engage in priorities, you know, for our neighborhoods, just as Councilwoman Parker was just talking about. I just have a couple quick questions on BERT, and, you know, we'll get into it with, you know, in the finance department, you know, when you come up in the budget. On page 51 of the 5-year plan, all right, there's a chart that compares the projections for growth of the BERT base in last year's 5-year plan to expectations for this year and projections for the new 5-year plan. Can you explain what assumptions were made that projected to 3.29% FY17 projections of last year, and what is happening now that leads you to believe that the BERT will see a zero change?
So we work with an outside consultant called IHS Markit who help us kind of look at the national economy, the regional economy, the state economy, and help us kind of put together these projections. In FY16, we came in significantly over our projections. And so part of our kind of assumption in FY17 is that some of this is a timing issue, that 17, we didn't want to be overly aggressive in 17, assuming that we could kind of maintain that high level of growth that we achieved in 16. And so that's why we kind of show kind of a flat change from 16 to 17. And then we, as you can see, we kind of grow significantly in 18 to kind of sort of go back up again where we think we will be. The BERT tax is honestly one of the hardest revenues for us to forecast. It's based on corporate profits, which can swing really widely from year to year. And every year, I think this is like kind of the hardest one that we come in and project. And we don't find out until the end of the fiscal year how well we're doing. So this year, we didn't find out until August or September how well the BERT was doing after the fiscal year is already closed. And so it's definitely one of our sort of riskiest taxes, and so we try and be a little cautious in our current year projections on that one. So that's where kind of the 17 number is flat.
Is it being cautious on the projections or collections?
It's cautious on projections. It's based on, so it's a complicated tax in the fact that there's sort of 2 years worth of taxes being collected, and it's really heavily based on corporate profits. And there's a lot of things that affect corporate profits, both on a kind of a national level and a regional level, as well as kind of business decisions that they're making kind of throughout the year. And so it's just a really difficult one for us to get. It's not a collections issue. It's how well the economy's doing, how well a business is doing issue.
It goes to the Council President's point of, you know, I think the general public not having any real like involvement or knowledge of line by line on our budget here, you know, that the economy's booming right now. I mean, we see cranes and everything like that, which is encouraging, but I mean, that's a, you know, a relatively significant difference in a, you know, 3-point-something, you know, projection or assumption, and it being flat. But
and also, I mean, as a business invests, their profits could be a little lower, but you know, because they're making they reduce some of their profits to make some investments. So it's always really hard to get the timing of how well the BERT's going to do on a year-to-year basis.
There's no doubt. And you talked about the assumptions for and projections for FY18. There is a pretty sharp increase from being flat.
Exactly.
Increase in the 5.88 growth coming off of a year that we just have. And how do you go from 0 to 5?
And that's kind of it. It's sort of a catch-up because it's sort of the IHS Markit, and I can send you some analysis that they did for us to put together these projections if that's helpful. But they assume that there's going to be a significant expansion in corporate profits that affect this year of this tax. I mean, it's an FY18 tax, so it's sort of based on what happens this calendar year. And they strongly believe that there'll be a significant expansion kind of nationwide in corporate profits. And so this is how this significantly impacts this projection. But I can send you their write-up and their analysis on that.
That'll be fine. I mean, we can, we'll get to that. And, it's just such a drastic.
I know.
Because you have almost a 9%
Yep.
increase over 2 years of the BERT, which seems to be like, well, this is great. I mean, let's lower our unemployment rate and let's, have us, dig ourselves out of poverty and,
Yep.
incrementally and put people back to work. So, with the corporate increase, I'm hoping that it would be an increase in our wage tax because they'll be hiring instead of, look, I think you, in your 5-year plan, had indicated that, production
Yep.
is good. I think the pay scales are going up, so that adds to our wage increase.
Yep.
We'd like to actually see people increase.
Yeah, and
that, we can't control that
Yep.
with our own budget, but I'm hoping that, the message out there is that, as corporate,
Profits rise, yep.
Profits rise, the hiring of people in the city of Philadelphia rises as well.
I think IHS had sort of assumed that actually it also means that higher wages. So that's as corporate profits rise, maybe they pay people more.
And it's reflected in
Yeah.
the 5-year plan. So, you certainly reflected that. I just hope that the indicators, right, for this increase comes to fruition, come July.
Yep.
And, we have a better sense on where we are for the rest of the year. Thank you.
Councilman.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Thank you for that compliment. I reflected, too, on who was here during the street years. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the 2017 Marathon. Let me first say thank you for putting in a tangible dollar amount to advance the work we still need to do around lead. And knowing that's been a poison for us, literally and figuratively, for the last 5 years. So I'm pleased to hear that has moved to the top of the chain. Councilwoman Parker has given great conversation, discussion around the fund balance, and a number of colleagues have spoken to the impact we will for sure see from Washington, D.C. So with that in mind, and the anticipated, or at least the talked about rumor, that the current president intends to slash, cut, or eliminate the federal budget for the Minority Business Development Agency. Please speak to or talk to how and what Commerce Procurement and the Office of Economic Development will be doing in anticipation of this loss.
Harold Epps is hiding.
Good morning, Councilwoman.
Good morning, good morning. I cannot imagine that table without Harold Epps.
Coming.
Morning.
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 So the question is, we hear the rumors, which may become real, regarding the Fed's announcement that they intend to eliminate the Minority Business Development Agency at the federal level. How and what have you all anticipated in response to that potential reality?
Just state your name for the record.
Harold Epps, Director of Commerce for the City of Philadelphia. As Chief of Staff Slusher said, we've evaluated a lot of options. We have not settled on any one because we are absolutely unsure as to the degree that those assumptions will become reality. I will tell you that if they are the worst case, then it will devastate that office.
So what percentage of your budget comes from the Feds?
Which budget?
The Commerce please, yes.
The CDBG part of the budget is the part that comes from the federal government, and I don't know that percentage offhand. We'll get to that answer.
Okay.
Councilwoman, I'd like to add that Victoria...
State your name for the record.
Iola Harper, Office of Economic Opportunity.
Victoria Hosendorf, who is the director of MBDA for this region, is part of our advisory council. She and I have had a number of conversations. That office provides technical assistance. They provide access to contracts on a corporate level. They provide help and assistance with bonding and insurance. And so we've met with MBDA, along with the two certification agencies, EMSDC and WeBank, to talk about how possibly the technical assistance that's provided through that office would also be able to be provided through these other agencies in the event that MBDA becomes a non-entity because of federal funding cuts. We are also working very closely with them. We have a certification roundtable where we meet with all of the agencies to look at what services each agency is offering, so that at some point, if this becomes a reality, we'll be able to look at how to service those businesses through the services that are available from other economic development agencies.
How old is that partnership?
Well, we started the certification roundtable when I started. So we had our first meeting about 2 months ago, and we're going to meet on a quarterly basis. That's our office's way of lifting up the agencies that support the Office of Economic Opportunity.
Councilwoman, I have now been informed that CDBG makes up about 50% of the commerce budget.
50%?
50.
Okay. Mr. President? Oh, okay.
Good.
I'm a bit stunned, that's all.
Look, it's going to be a long budget season.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, whenever, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Blackwell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to, yes, I'm surprised that is 50% too. We are all really working hard and interested in pre-K, and we want to make sure that there's some system for us to judge how. We just had hearings last week even on black males who graduate from high school and their ability to go to college. We need a system from pre-K to fourth and then high school that judges the education received by young people, because we can't continue to say things don't change if we don't have a way of hearing where we are and judging the progress of our young people. We want to mention that. We wanted to mention two other things. One is we are very happy for funding housing for rapid rehousing and temporary rental assistance. And but we keep hearing a lot about this preventive program in New York. We'd like to have more information for where we are on that, or on how maybe we can work with that next year. And number three, and my last point is, you know, we have, all of us have people from time to time who deal with disabilities. And we continue to call them at that mayor's department. And when we call them, they do a wonderful job and come to us and do whatever they can, but they don't seem to have a real department. So we're asking you to look at that, give these folks some people to work with, make it a real department, and get back to us on those. So they're my three issues.
Sorry, what was the last one there? I couldn't hear which.
Mayor's Commission on Disability.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, they're my three issues. So you all, I don't have to have an answer today, but I'd like to during this process.
I can answer a little bit on the Mayor's Commission on Disabilities as the folks from Supportive Housing and Pre-K come up for that. So you're correct, and over the last year, we've moved that office under the Office of Diversity and Inclusion in order to, you know, just within this year's budget, provide some more support. But that has also enabled us to take a look at what those types of offices and commissions look like across the nation, and see that that ours is not at the same level of funding or staffing as other places. So one of the proposals that will be in the mayor's office budget is for an additional staffer to support, the Office of Disabilities, and also some additional funding to help support their work because Charles is one person and we want to give him more support.
You have a person who's already disabled and we kill him. But I have some detailed information. I'll make that available and as suggestions as to what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
morning.
Ms. Hirsch, I did not need you to talk about what you need for your department.
I was just going to tell you what we have. I just wanted to, I'm Liz Hirsch, I'm the Director of the Office of Homeless Services. Thank you, Councilwoman, for being such
Yeah, we want to be helpful. I don't want to come and ask you about what you get and don't get. We know that you do all yours and more.
Thank you. In answer to your question about the home base program, which is the model that they use in New York City to prevent homelessness, we don't have the wherewithal to fully implement that program here in Philadelphia at this time. What we are trying to do is take their risk assessment and apply that to our prevention programs. And that essentially it's data informed, and it looks at who's most likely to come into shelter if they don't get prevention services. So we are looking at implementing, using that risk assessment to guide, prioritize really who gets homelessness prevention services.
Now, we trust you. We know you do the best with what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the things a five-year plan allows us to do is project into future fiscal years and get ready for expenditures or priorities that are years to come. One of them is based on the recommendations of the MacArthur Foundation on changing how we do criminal justice, looking with an eye towards reducing the population in our prisons on State Road and changing the methodology that we do corrective action for individuals that run afoul of the law, take care of the victims that are hit by that. And what I want to know is the preliminary findings, both from the MacArthur Foundation and the Philadelphia City Council's Committee on Justice Reform, are moving towards in the same direction, is three basic things. One of them is GPS technology as an alternative to incarceration, where individuals are monitored through those technologies, and therefore we reduce our costs for my frugal members of council from 130 or roughly a day, and I'll get beat up about that number, down to maybe 2/3 of that. So if that investment is made this year and the following years, how would that be projected out, A? B, how we look at options like day reporting centers. And I understand there may be some money for a study. Councilwoman Blackwell was a trailblazer in attempting to get that type of facility in our district. It was met with fear. It was met with, NIMBY and things like that. But I think we're at a point where when former President Barack Obama walks into a facility and says we need to do something different, that the general public is ready to receive that. And then finally, what we're going to do to train staff for that new type of restorative justice model. We have good, solid, I love going to the prison graduation of new officers every year. But if a probation officer, a prison guard, and a social worker had a baby, it would be that new type of professional that dealt with criminogenic behavior in a different way. So the question again is, are we shifting and putting in the budget now for those things that we anticipate based on those joint recommendations?
So it's kind of a multi kind of pronged answer, I think. So we are always going. So the the way that we budget in the prison, like there's obviously the prison's budget itself, and there are a few key expenses in the prison's budget. One is obviously related to food, and that's a significant contract for our inmates. We also have a large healthcare contract, and these are big contracts that are actually going to be put out to bid this year. These factors into the kind of also how high that census is. And the census right now is doing well. I think we were at, I think I have the latest. Yeah, we were at 6657 on Monday.
6616 this morning.
This morning, oh nice. Okay, so it's going in the right direction. I think what we're trying to figure out is the balance between the census going down, which should lead to savings, which we're really hoping that will lead to savings, and especially in things like overtime and other big costs, but also that things like healthcare costs are growing at the same time. And so we're trying to balance that in the prison's budget this year. We have these contracts that are going out, and we're going to analyze what those costs come back at. And that's, I think, one of the biggest drivers to the costs this year.
Maybe you didn't understand my question. The MacArthur Foundation and our Committee on Criminal Justice want to do things differently in an effort to join you to reduce that population. 3 key things they want to talk about: GPS ankle bracelet technology and investment in that, and a study to look at whether day reporting centers, alternatives to incarceration, are warranted and where. There she is. That's who I need. Yep. There we go. There we go. My criminal justice expert. Hi, Julie.
Julie Wertheimer, Office Criminal Justice Managing Director's Office. So to your point, Councilman, in the Managing Director's Office budget planned in kind of the lump sum, lumped into our MacArthur matching efforts is money for a feasibility study for the Day Reporting Center that we are working on a draft of an RFP for, but of course would not go until the fiscal year, assuming this budget is approved. The Day Reporting Center RFP is going to evaluate what kind of population or populations we should serve given the change in census at PDP, whether it's pretrial, probation, those returning, or a combination of both, and what kind of services they would most benefit from. We don't have things reflected for that in the 5-year plan because we don't know what they are yet, and that's the purpose of the feasibility study. With regards to GPS, the First Judicial District is better positioned to speak to this during their own agency hearing, but for the most part, right now, the first stage is basically to change over the technology rather than expand the use of it, mainly because right now the monitors they have are still landline-based, and so this is going to a new technology that doesn't necessarily require a landline.
So yes, yes, and yes, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's really easy. Finally, my question, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for indulging me, sir, is gun violence. And this is on behalf of Kenyatta Johnson, who is not here, but I would be remiss if we didn't ask that. So agencies like PYN, I call them violence interceptors, is something that we want to see emphasized. Whenever, unfortunately, there is one act of gun violence, there is usually another shortly to follow. And we want to look at a PYN model or agencies like that and want to get a sense of how many do we fund every year and whether or not they're having that impact. So ideally, when something happens in a neighborhood, a rapid response team goes out to try to stop the bleeding figuratively, stop the retaliation actually, and whether or not we're planning that kind of process. And I see our Police Commissioner Ross on his way. So that's my final question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Oh, you didn't answer.
Rich Ross, Police Commissioner. So, Councilman, obviously, we would enjoy programs like that. You know, we have ceasefire in the 22nd District. As you know, there are some cities like New York and LA that employ that pretty well and significantly. I don't know that we would ever have the funding that New York just put out, I think $20-something million on the street, and LA has done that for a number of years as well. But having those people on the street, they have an ability to connect with folks in a way that we can't. And you're absolutely right, as well as your colleague, Kenyatta Johnson, in that, trying to stave off that retaliation is what we try to do, is what we try to get in front of. And having those voices out there that resonate in a way that mine or anybody in these uniforms never will, is something that will help us. Obviously, it requires significant funding, which is what you're talking about. But it's something that we support to the degree that we can find, the money to do so.
Just wanted to find out if we are funding any existing programs, PYN, stuff like that, not to be answered now, because I'm going to yield to my colleagues, but as we come back, I want to know, is there a group of those things in your budget orbit that are addressing specifically gun violence and, as I call them, violence interceptors? So,
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman. The chair now recognizes Councilman O. Was it green? I'm sorry. That's what happens when you walk out of the room. You lose your place. Councilman Green, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Council President. I just want to reiterate the comments that Councilman Blackwell made regarding the Mayor's Office of Disabilities. I had hearings in my committee on disabilities last year regarding the inadequate funding we have for that office. My staff has been analyzing and meeting with advocates from throughout the city of Philadelphia about what other cities spend in that office. I know additional resources that will be provided from a people perspective, but I'm also very curious to see how much dollars will be provided to that office. So I look forward to getting our budget books in detail so I can see exactly how those funds are allocated. I want to touch base on some of the questions that Councilman Dom raised regarding the pension fund. I commend the mayor with his and entire administration with their goal of trying to get our pension fund at the level of funding to make it fully funded. Some of the questions I have, one question in particular, what is the rate of return that we're looking at in order to achieve that? Because looking at the information I've seen, and I know with the stack hybrid plan, as well as additional funding from sales tax going in, but what's the rate of return we must meet in order to get that level of funding within 13 years?
Sure. We're assuming 7.7% return.
Right, so it's the assumed rate of return.
Correct.
And I guess my concern is, considering that what the market has been like for the past number of years, we've had a very strong market, is a period of time where the market's not going to be as strong as it has been. And so considering that and looking at trends historically, do you think even at that 7% rate of return, we'll be able to get the fully funding in 13 years?
We do. I mean, for the last, I guess, year to date, we're at about 8.5%. And what the actuary really assumes underneath it is there'll be years when you exceed the assumption and years when you don't make it, but then on average, you'll get there. So our assumption is that we will. We also think if we don't, let's say we average 7.5% and we're funded at 75% instead of 80%, that's real progress and that's an achievement too.
Also, in the 5-year plan, and I've pushed legislation in this body and been advocating regarding some of the issues, some of the benefits of medical marijuana. My understanding is that once medical marijuana is fully implemented in the Commonwealth, that'll bring in about $150 million, and that by 2020, it should be about $2 billion industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and the Commonwealth will be about 9.2% of the national market. Has there been any type of analysis been done in reference to the 5-year plan, what impact medical marijuana will have in our local budget?
There has not, but I'm assuming the next question will be, can we do that analysis? And we'll look at that.
Okay. Also, have some other questions in reference to performance-based budgeting. And just real quickly, in looking at some of the information I've seen regarding performance-based budgeting, we're looking at trying to be accountability and data-driven decision-making. And we're using this as a way of having a return on investment. And so will that be factored into next year's budget process as you go through the fall? I know we're only looking at a small number of departments this year, and over the course of 4 years, we'll get through the entire city. But as departments come in the fall and you're looking at the return on investment, are you going to factor in that perspective in reference to allocating funding going forward for next year's budget?
Yeah, and we're actually going to be tracking things hopefully on a quarterly basis, as long as the sort of the data, some of the data points you can only track on an annual basis, but as much as we can. And then we meet with departments throughout the year, and we'll be talking to them about how well they're doing against the goals, especially if we've given them additional funding that then represented that we're going to improve some performance. So it will definitely factor into decision making. It's not going to be the only factor in our decision making, because obviously there are things that come up that affect how well they're doing that isn't just purely sort of based on whether you've got enough resources. It could be HR issues, it could be IT issues, it could be some other complicated issues, an external factor that we hadn't considered. But it's definitely going to be part of our decision making, and we're hoping that having the data will allow us to make those better decisions.
And one final question, because I know my time is up. How did you come up with the performance-based metrics for those departments? Like, for example, for L&I versus public health, how were those numbers derived?
So we worked in partnership with each department. Each department obviously has to own their measures. It's not something that we in the budget office just want to dictate to anybody. But we worked also with the managing director's office as a performance management unit within the managing director's office, and we worked alongside each cabinet member of the department too. And we worked sort of in collaboration. We provided some examples of what other cities have been using to sort of give some best practices. We also try to make sure that the measures that the departments were looking at, we could collect. We had the data to be able to collect that, and that you could kind of easily track it on an annual basis at least. Because there are some major outcomes that we'd love to be able to have to see how well we're doing against some big impacts, but it's not something that you can annually track. So we worked in partnership. Some of the measures you'll see are in better shape than other measures. Partly it's because this is kind of work in progress, so we'll be working with departments to improve them, to refine them. We may make tweaks as we see that we didn't get to what we really needed to get to really understand what was going on with that activity. But it was very much a partnership effort. The departments, we really kind of wanted the departments to decide how they wanted to be evaluated, and then we worked with them on what those targets should be.
I look forward to receiving our budget books in detail so I can compare, especially those departments under performance-based budgeting with prior years. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Actually want to jump in real briefly. Forgot about the second round where I get to participate in also. A couple of quick questions. We briefly referenced this, I think, Councilman Dom talked about the fund balance, and as you know over the years, Rob, I'm a fund balance guy. And I understand it, particularly given the diminishing support from the state and the federal level, we've had to increase our expenditures on the local level because we simply have to take care of our people. A strategy that unfortunately sometimes people on the state and the federal level feel no obligation to do. But it has obviously affected our credit rating. And is there like a conversation with Moody's, because they've downgraded our rating to a degree, but we've chosen to basically continue to take care of our needs. And long term, in terms of our credit rating being lower, it clearly can affect our ability to borrow. Is there a strategy to increase our revenue stream? Because I've seen years along, we just kind of like move the chess pieces and we don't really grow our revenue base, so to speak. It's like we make more, even when the points when we make more money as a city, we like spend more money. At some point, do we like kind of like, stop spending money?
So I guess there are a few questions in there. We kind of go back to the beginning about are there conversations with Moody's? We have ongoing conversations with all of the rating agencies, so we're in constant communication with them. So for example, as soon as the 5-year plan comes out, we brief each of them on the plan and of what we're doing, where we're making investments. And they as you're saying, what one of their primary concerns, and they put this in the write-ups, is our fund balance. And you actually raised a really good point about what happens with our fund balance is that typically we talked about the street administration. When fund balance gets high, the next thing you see is kind of a race to spend, and then it goes down almost immediately.
That's what politicians do.
Right.
And I know it's our fault. It's not you all's fault. I mean, it's politicians.
Yeah.
We haven't seen the program that we don't like yet.
Right.
But I guess...
But part of it is, we're a city with a high level of poverty. We're a city and a county, so we have a lot of needs. And even though we have spent in a way that keeps our fund balances lower than they should be, we also don't meet all our needs. So every year when we're putting our budget and our 5-year plan together, it's figuring out those trade-offs. So I don't think that completely answers your question, but I think that's where we are.
Every year, I always talk about this increasing the revenue base. And unfortunately, over the last years, because of the aggressive nature of the other governments, we've been on the defense. And I guess my question is, do we have a clear strategy of increasing our revenue base, or we just kind of hope that it happens? I mean, it could be, we talk about job creation, and at the end of the day, I've come from the school that the best social service program is a good job. So do we focus our strategy on creating jobs and making sure that everybody's obviously prepared for those jobs that we create, or do we have a strategy where we put our investment towards education for the jobs that are in the city of Philadelphia? When you reference eds and meds, and I always talk about this, that's the probably, other than the government, probably, and it might be more than the most significant employer in our city. Do we say our investment is going to go towards creating educational programs for people to take those jobs? I mean, and I'm not talking about a doctor, I'm not talking about a registered nurse, but I'm talking about all those many, many thousands of support jobs that are in hospitals and universities. Do we focus our strength on that? And it's like trying to get a clearer sense of what is our strategy going to be, as opposed to plugging the dike every time, because we find ourselves in these fiscal challenges.
Right. And I think it's a combination of things. There are some things that are kind of relatively short-term, like the Penn's Landing investment that should create lots of jobs.
You think that's short-term?
Well, as opposed to what I'm about to say, which is long-term, which is something like the pre-K investment, which is something that will have an impact over decades as opposed to over 5 to 6 years.
Okay.
So I think there are a number, and there's the tax reduction program that's also designed to help make us more attractive, like the changes in the BERT that have 60,000 fewer businesses having to pay the BERT.
100,000 exemption?
Yeah.
You're talking about?
Yes.
And has that worked?
Yeah, I mean, there are far fewer businesses that pay now, which means that they have more money to hire people.
Right.
So I think it's a whole bunch of strategies that have to work together. It's probably something that when Commerce comes, they'll be in their hearing, they'll be better able to address. But I do think it's a whole number of things together.
I hear you. I mean, Commerce is going to talk about what they're going to talk about, but this is at the elected level. I'm just saying, at the end of the day, the electeds get to determine the policy and the direction of our revenues and expenditures. I mean, that's just a simple reality. So I'm saying at some point we got to make a decision. Like you talk about short term, the Penn's Landing, the short term is construction. And then we have to hope that those buildings that are the speculative construction of buildings, that's kind of long term. I'm talking a little more shorter term. I'm talking about, like as an example, you can identify a number of programs or other job opportunities in the city that with certain training, people could be in a position to take those jobs. They got this new thing, I'm like a technophobe, but they got this coding. So when I talked to Mr. Hackney, he says, yeah, we're actually starting to teach the children in school, in lower grades, coding. But I understand that there's coding opportunities, not just necessarily from a job, but from creating a job for yourself, from an entrepreneurial class. When I took a tour on Frankfurt Avenue, and on the upper floors of all of those restaurants, they got like all these startup businesses. And a lot of these kids have like serious computer skills. A lot of these adults have serious computer skills. And is there a strategy for people to create jobs. As we all know, small businesses is the largest sector of jobs in the country. So, I mean, do we have like a shorter, not a construction of a park, which is great, and then hopefully they build some buildings down there, and people come down there and do whatever, but like more of a shorter term.
So I think also taking a look at something like pre-K, where you do have the long-term effects over what that's going to look like over a decade, but you also have a couple hundred jobs that have already been created just by the funding of those additional 2,000 seats. And I forget the exact number that we had about what the investment from early childhood education in the neighborhood spending that comes as a side effect of just having, those jobs there. So I think that if you take a look at the proposals made in last year's budget, you had sort of big transformational ideas: pre-K, community schools, rebuild. And this year, looking at this budget, it's the continuation of those big programs that I think have those immediate benefits and also the longer term benefits, and also just sort of the basic simple city services that Washington or Harrisburg can ignore because it's not their job. But if there's holes in the street, every council member here is going to hear about it. Or if tax collection's not on time, you hear about that. Senators don't, presidents don't. And so I think that we've made a focus on some of the investments this year that do help sort of plug some of those holes, because we're also continuing those bigger picture goals that we do believe will help create some short-term and long-term economic growth.
Okay. So, and you may or may not be able to get this. Can you get for us, say, all right, I'm going to choose eds and meds because I believe that's the largest and in the foreseeable future, the most sustained job opportunities in the city. Can you get from wherever you would get it a list of the categorization of those jobs? We don't even have to deal with the doctors, because that'll take care of itself. But all of the support jobs that are in our universities, hospitals around, and I know this may take some time, so we got 2 months.
I think Commerce will be able to do that, and also probably some stuff from the Managing Director's Office and Office of Labor and Workforce Development with Philly Works, so we can get them to put some of that together.
Identifying those categories and identifying the requirements in terms of individuals employed on those jobs. Just so I can get a sense of, maybe we need to target, because I see the growth. Anytime I go out to Councilwoman Blackwell's district, and I cross over that river and I see it's like, man, it's like a whole other city out there, and I'm saying, well, who's getting all these jobs, right? And unfortunately, it's probably not, majority Philadelphians. And if we can figure out a way to get these people here educated and employed, it would benefit us more significantly. So that would be very helpful to me if you can get me that. All right, thank you. Yes, Councilman.
We've talked about it with Rebuild, and I have it with Brandywine, Penn, Drexel, USP, and we're holding all this. That's why I'm holding up all these billions of dollars, and that is we want to make sure that our young people in the CTE programs are included and that they move forward, not as pre-apprentices, but apprentices, and that we have 50% of the neighborhoods and at least 40% in terms of actual numbers who have jobs for these projects. So that is so important. That's what all this is about. And I'm hoping that everybody will give a little so that these billions of dollars can be spent. That's what it's all about. Right. Everybody wants development, but if you can't have people in your neighborhoods working, if you can't have children become apprentices, then we have big trouble. So thank you, Mr. President, for making that point.
You're welcome, Councilwoman. I know you always have a strategy associated with your development plans. Appreciate the fact that you play serious hardball on that. Appreciate it. All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman O.
Thank you very much, Council President. So I have the same questions along the lines of the Council President. Some of it we discuss every year, but I'd just like to see if there's some progress on it. I do agree with the Council President in light of the challenges that this city faces And, the withholding of federal dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, the withholding of state dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of the tax money that our citizens pay would be catastrophic to our city and to our region, and I think ultimately to the entire state. And to aggressively go after this money and to try to explain to people how problematic it would be, the job loss, the universities, the research, the companies, the medical services, the technology, tourism, all those type of things. Is there an investment or an effort by our city right now to try to reach out to people, to let them understand, regardless of how you feel about sanctuary cities, regardless, withholding our money to our city, our schools, would be catastrophic for us, and I don't know that you can recover from something like that.
Yes, I do believe that we've been pretty consistent in our conversation with legislators and in our public messaging that the correct response to a policy dispute is not defunding a city. That's not the appropriate way to disagree over a legal matter. And so we have continued that in our conversation with legislators to understand, and have also tried to highlight the ways in which many different types of federal funding that has been proposed as the cut, those proposed cuts are all how devastating those would be. But again, going back to this issue of sanctuary cities, it also is a matter of how they decide to interpret that and whether or not they're successful in upholding what we believe to be an unconstitutional mandate on us.
The PICA wage tax, we know, is going to sunset. And I know, Rob DeBoe, that you're working on something. Are we any closer to resolving that problem?
So then kind of the simplest option, if we don't get new legislation to extend PICA, is to go back to the structure that we had before PICA was put in place, which would mean the PICA tax would go away, but the wage tax would go up to replace the amount of lost PICA tax revenue.
And we are able to do that on our own?
Yes, we are.
Okay. How much money is being taken off the streets of Philadelphia from on-street parking functions created by the General Assembly, taken off the streets of Philadelphia and being sent and spent in townships and counties outside of our city? Do you know that number?
So I don't think any of the money from parking enforcement goes to other jurisdictions. I think that's red light camera
Is it
revenue.
only red light camera?
Yeah, I think so. That's shared statewide. I'm not sure of that the exact amount, but we can get you that.
Could you provide to the council president, if you can, a detailed list of all the legislation or authorization to the parking authority to collect revenues in the city of Philadelphia that is then sent to accounts outside of our city, sent and spent outside of our city? Because
Outside,
I don't know what it is.
that goes to other counties, you mean?
Yeah, I don't
Okay,
know.
yes.
Wherever it goes, I don't know what it is because we don't have an ability to understand that without getting that from Harrisburg, I think.
Yeah,
Parking authority possibly.
we can get you that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to talk about the Office of OEO and the 5-year plan showing that we are adding a position of OEO that will help us assist with the monitoring and compliance of city and non-city EOPs. And while I know Commerce and, if they come up to explain this, I know they'll do it even more during our actual budget process, but can you, as an administration, sort of give us an overview about, what this position will do, but more importantly, what are you trying to address? Sort of, this is sort of overall, right, 30,000 feet. Why are we hiring, someone to monitor the compliance with city and non-city EOP plans? So for example, if the position is going to assist in this monitoring and compliance, how many people do we have now, and what's their caseload like?
Sure. Iola Harper, OEO. That position was requested because we are going to increase the number of oversight committees that will be convened around EOPs. This is in part due to legislation that was introduced by Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds-Brown that will trigger an oversight committee. I don't know that we've settled on the trigger amount yet. Historically, our oversight committees, the trigger amount, the dollar amount that would have us set up an oversight committee was determined internally, and it was at $50 million. This legislation that I'm actually very supportive of and happy to work with is going to create a trigger amount of what I hope will be $10 million. And what will happen as a result of that is the number of oversight committees that will have to be convened will probably triple and almost quadruple. All right, so that means that an oversight committee is a group of people who meet on a predetermined basis. It could be monthly, it could be quarterly. And so those committees have to be convened, they have to be organized, they have to be staffed. Right now, our staff is 14, most of whom are dedicated to various city departments and who don't have the flexibility to attend that number of oversight, that number of convenings of oversight committees. So
I want to stop you there, and I want to say thank you, because what you did was you just echoed, took up a lot of my time, but what you did was you just echoed what I hoped you would get on the record, and it's that the legislation in and of itself helps us to deal with the growing need for the oversight and compliance. And when Councilwoman Reynolds-Brown moved forward with this legislation, she consistently talked about it moving us in the direction, right? And that this is definitely a great start. Mr. President, I have one more question before we conclude, so I want to thank you for your response. The question is in regards to CAMA, and it's on pages 24 to 25. Of the 5-year plan, and we talk about that CAMA could be implemented by the end of this calendar year or beginning 2018. I just wanted to know, do we know when is this going to be completed? And tell me what fiscal year, because I don't remember. We talked a lot about this last year, but what fiscal year will CAMA actually impact revenue collections for us on the commercial side?
Yeah, so what we have, I think as of within the last week, a tentative agreement with a vendor to manage CAMA. We had a little bit of a setback in timing because the last vendor actually left after months of negotiation, so that set us back. So we're kind of now at the start again of implementing, which should take a couple of years, so it probably won't be used for an assessment probably till FY21, which means in 20. But I see the pain in your face, which I understand. But that doesn't mean we won't be doing full reassessments every year. We'll be doing those. This year, we're just completing a commercial reassessment. Every year after this, we'll be doing a full reassessment. Not having a CAMA means that process won't be as efficient as we want it to be. It'll be clunkier, but we can still do it, and we will each year.
So, and Mr. President, I thank you for your leeway here. And the reason why this is so extremely important, because again, I'm talking about the noise coming from the ground up. When our constituents hear about the amount of delinquent taxes that are on the table in the city of Philadelphia, they think about how AVI has impacted residential taxes, and then they think about the fact that they've been disciplined and they've been paying, but we haven't been able to, from a technological perspective, ensure consistently that the assessments of commercial properties, are as accurate as those of residential. So what I wanted you to do was to sort of just clarify that, for the record, because one of the issues that I've heard, because you mentioned tax lien securitization earlier today, and Councilman Dom and I, we talked about this not long ago, is that I would love to see some sort of pilot where we focus on securitization for commercial and or industrial properties. And the reason why I say that is because I think about the report that council did when I was in Harrisburg, which demonstrated the number of residential owners in the city of Philadelphia for properties in the city of Philadelphia, but they lived outside of the city. So we weren't talking about the majority of Philadelphians sort of not paying their fair share. And I'm really thinking about those long-term residents of our city, but those who view Philadelphia property as an investment. So if we were ever interested in some kind of securitization, and you tell me, have you all considered that we're focused on commercial and or industrial properties?
So I think the first lien sale we did 2 or 3 years ago was all non-residential. So that was kind of the first stab at it. I think looking at kind of having a larger impact requires more than just commercial and residential, but we can, as we finish...
Commercial and industrial.
Industrial, yeah. But as we finish up the process of selecting a firm and kind of building out the program, we can give you more details on kind of why we're doing what we're doing and what exactly we've looked at as we
So for the record, let me thank you, and I want to thank Councilman Dom clearly for his advocacy in this area. It is an issue that is of grave importance to residents who have been paying their fair share for a very long time, and they sort of see the flash of the delinquent taxes that are owed to the city of Philadelphia and somehow believe that money is being left on the table when they've been stealing from Peter to pay Paul to make ends meet. And I just wanted to make sure we got that on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Chair recognizes Councilman Taubenberger.
Thank you, Council President.
Welcome,
I have a question for Mr. DuBois, and actually, I'm going to tell you ahead of time, you don't have to answer it in full, but if we can get the answer at some point. And much was talked about the loss of federal grants or loss of federal money through the state with the legislation that's in effect, or executive order as it relates to the dispute on sanctuary cities. And I think very clearly that we have to be prepared for that if it does happen. Is it possible to get by department approximately how much would be lost if these executive orders or SB 10 in the state goes through? Is that possible?
Here we can get you by department is how much they receive without speculating about what might be lost.
Okay, so but the last question that I have on this is all of that possibly could be lost. I mean, that's what's on the table if this thing goes, it's not on the table.
Yeah, so some, in terms of the various proposals from both the state and the federal government, there are different funds that were highlighted yesterday by the Attorney General, and that is the most specific that any of the executive orders, both state or federal, have gotten so far. So we would be able to provide a list of the federal funding that we receive, but there's been great dispute around how that would be interpreted, potentially at the state level, and then also at the federal level. That was the first time anything that was specifically stated, and there's also some potential issues with that.
I understand.
But,
I'm not asking you to judge on the law, but I'm asking, for less, because as Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown asked, and I was really floored by the answer coming back from Mr. Epps, that as much as 50% of the Commerce Department is funded by grants. So that's a lot because they do a great job, and we need them.
Yep.
So knowing what we're getting into would be helpful to at least plan. Thank you. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. A few more questions. I want to follow up with Councilwoman Parker's comments about OPA. First of all, you should know that her district has some of the best tax-paying people in the city. they do a great job in paying their taxes for district. But on the OPA, I know this year we focused on commercial assessments, and I'm not sure you have the numbers yet, but I just wanted to find out if there was any way possible of knowing exactly what we could anticipate in extra dollars from the commercial assessments for the next year.
So there isn't. We should know relatively soon. We're kind of in the process of wrapping that up, and I actually think that values are going to start being posted at the end of this week online, and then notifications will go out in 2 or 3 weeks. And I think we have a briefing set with council members later this week for when we have those numbers.
Is there any idea, is this 20 million, 50 million? Any idea what the numbers are?
We don't want to speculate because, it wasn't our intention to raise more money. It was our intention to get the assessments accurate.
Of course. And the second question, I noticed your consultant positions, you have $500,000 for consultants. And my question is that enough considering the amount of properties we have and what the work that's needed? Because clearly that's a very good investment on our part.
Yeah, we think it is. We think it'll give us, consultants were a big help in the assessment process. I think a lot of what we did, we tested with them to make sure they were comfortable with it. And we think that they'll also be a big help on the appeal process. And if it's not, if we see that we need more help, we can revisit.
Okay. Let me just mention something else. I'm going to address what Council President Clark talked about, which is technology. I just got the statistics, I think last week, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics nationwide. And they compare Philadelphia to the top 10 cities that are similar. And so, I always say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So in the past year, Philadelphia has the second highest unemployment rate of the major cities, 5.9. Only Detroit has 9.8, and even Cleveland and Baltimore are lower than us. And then on the median wage, we're the second lowest in the country. We're at $48,000, and Phoenix is actually lower, and Pittsburgh, Baltimore are all higher than us. So going into that category, we have an area called technology in Philadelphia. And by the way, I was extremely proud that the mayor attended the South by Southwest event in Austin. I thought that was great. And he showed his support. We had 250 people in Philadelphia in the tech space in Austin, Texas. We have about 14,000 jobs in tech. The economic multiplier of technology is 5 to 1. For every job we create in tech, we create 5 more jobs. Clearly, that's an area where we have to expand dramatically. New York City has like 543,000 jobs in tech. When we're looking at taking people out of poverty and lowering unemployment and raising wages, which helps everyone, what more can we do? I'm not sure this is a question for you guys or it's Harold, but what can we do in that technology area to support these companies and expand this area dramatically? As Council President said, on Frankfurt Avenue, the second floor, you have all these young people, which is phenomenal. We have had 100,000 millennials move here in the last 10 years. We need to support this technology space.
Again, Harold Epps, Director of Commerce. Councilman Dom, the Managing Director, Mike DeVerdinas, and I co-chair a comprehensive workforce development initiative made up of the government and the private sector. And I got asked by one of your fellow councilmen the other day, what is the number one lever we could pull for unemployment improvement and poverty reduction? My answer was workforce development. Yes, we have a very high level of college degree attainment and retention, but we have the lowest level, we have the highest level of high school, one of the lowest levels of 2 and 4 years. So we've got to take the rest of our population and give them the skills to get a job and to become an entrepreneur. We are keenly focused on the workforce development, but as Mr. DeBoe said, it's going to take us some years and probably decades to get the kind of improvement we need, but we are fully committed to it. If you came to one of these meetings, you would be very pleased with the progress we're making. We're setting a strong foundation, but it's not going to happen overnight. But I am very confident we're headed in the right direction, but it's going to be a slog. And by the way, I completely agree with your statement about the workforce, the job creation, and the population growth, but it's going to take us a few years to get there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Councilman.
You done, Council? Yeah. No, well, we might be wrapping this up soon, so okay, let's get it in. We might get out of school early today. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Reynolds Brown.
Thank you very much. While we ask the Commissioner for Boards and Commissions to come forward, I want to follow up on Councilman Green's questions around the let me get this right. The program-based budgeting and the data collection that will happen. What I need to know is, will that data capture, reflect diversity and inclusion goals as well throughout the program-based budgeting process?
We certainly can. I mean, we've mostly been focusing on performance of the activities, kind of tracking that, but we can add anything related to diversity and other aspects into those performance metrics.
So that will be a formal ask.
Okay.
Because that's an area that too many of us in this council care about. It should not be overlooked and should resonate and have as a high priority as other areas. So thank you for that. If we could ask our OEO officer to please come back to the table as well. What about our board and commissions? Is Nina Ahmad here?
Yes, Nina's there.
I only have 5 minutes. So to Ms. Harper, let me say thank you for working with my office and us trying to, as partners, figure out how we find a number that's comfortable for where we need to be and where you think we ought to be with regards to that particular bill.
You're welcome.
And so, an elevator explanation on why we need to do this, so that it's clear for everybody why this needs to happen.
Why the bill needs to happen? Because it increases oversight on EOP projects, essentially. It puts more eyes on the projects that are of concern to City Council and, frankly, the citizens of the city. And so it's a good thing when we're able to have incremental monitoring of a project as opposed to finding out after the project is over that it did not, in fact, meet goals or that there was some problem.
Thank you very much for the record. So give us a tight explanation, Ms. Ahmad, on where we are with boards and commissions in terms of women representation and people of color. How many boards and commissions there are, how many are completely filled, and where you are in that process.
Good afternoon, Council President and Council members. So we have a few commissions already operational.
What's the number?
So I'm counting them. We have the Women's Commission, we have the African American Male Commission, we have the Millennial Advisory Committee, we have the Asian American Commission, and then we have, what did I miss? Yeah, those are the commissions we have operational at the moment.
So that's 4 or 5. I lost count.
So, Councilor, are you talking about all boards and commissions that are appointed by the mayor? So, Deputy Mayor Ahmad has a number that fall under the Office of Public Engagement. In terms of the overall number of boards and commissions, I don't have that number offhand, but we can get that to you. But I do have the number from our annual diversity and inclusion report that indicates the number of appointees that we have appointed this year, the number of those folks who have actually disclosed their identities to us so that we know what our breakdown looks like for men and women.
Okay.
And that number, I have 289 new board members who disclosed information. I think that the actual number is a little bit higher, so we'll get that to you.
Across how many boards, though? Across how many boards?
I will get that information across all boards to which the mayor appoints members.
Okay.
And so some of those are dictated by term limits. So there are some boards, such as the Mayor's Commission on African American Males or the Women's Commission, where those were fully reappointed. Okay. And there's other boards where we've only had 1 or 2 over the last year seats open up on those boards. So the way that we've tracked this as an administration has been the overall number of appointees that the mayor has control over and making sure that we have diversity in who those appointees are.
Okay.
And so I have those. Are those the numbers that you're looking for? I don't have the breakdown by individual boards and commissions. I have it overall.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah, so it's 50.8% are men and 48.6% female, which that number, we should be striving to flip that because that's not representative of the Philadelphia population.
I'm so glad you said that.
We have 10.8% identified as Latino, 11% identified as Asian, 37.5% as African American, and 40.6% as white. So as you can also tell, we need to be bumping up that Latino number, bumping up the African American number, and lowering the number of white appointees in terms of, so that's an opportunity for us as we look at our new appointments to make sure that we're identifying where we're not appointing folks that are reflective, but that also does not include the people who are already on those boards because we haven't had that opportunity to have them disclosed because they weren't our appointees.
Got it. Okay. The bell has rung. I'll honor it. So, thank you.
Councilwoman, if you have another question, I mean, we're
short
going to have two
follow-up.
people teed up, yeah.
So, there are X number of boards and commissions that report to you, Ms. Ahmad?
That's correct. The
And
ones
that-
I mentioned are the ones that report to me,
I see. And then the others,
are outside. So for example, LGBT affairs is to the Office of Inclusion and Diversity.
I see.
And so there's a few others that fall outside my jurisdiction.
very well. And those report to the mayor, right, Jane?
They actually report to lots of different folks, but they're
Okay.
appointed by the mayor. So for instance, the
by the
zoning
mayor.
board or the mayor's appointees to the SEPTA board.
Okay. I know that it's a big animal and managing it is hard, but it's important to put on the record where we are when
Yep.
it comes to making sure those boards look like Philadelphia.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman?
Just wanted to follow up on this issue because as many of you know, we created Echoes of Africa in 2000 and we created the Mayor's Commission on African and Caribbean Immigrant Affairs 12 years ago. So we're open. If the mayor would like to appoint somebody, we're open. We had an affair just this past weekend for Women's Month at the University of Pennsylvania. But when it comes to being active and doing things, we're there. So we're open for anyone who wants to come, anyone who would like to have someone included. We have already 35 African countries that are part of our group. And we just wanted to know, all of you to know that we're there and we're open for whatever inclusion you all would like. Thanks. Thanks, Mr.
Thank you,
President.
Councilwoman. Real quick on that issue for you. With respect to the boards and commissions, do you have that categorized by each board and commission in terms of the participation, the female, minority, all that, or is that just an aggregate number? Because there's some boards and
Yeah.
commissions that may be weighted
More heavily one way or the other,
If you have a board of commission
yeah.
on women's affairs, it's probably going to be all
It
women.
is.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, so at this point, we're working towards improving the database that we use to collect all this information because one of the things that's important for us as we're making appointments is, you know, a lot of times there's a board that you need to have a lawyer, you need to have an accountant, you need to have an engineer, an architect. There's a specific sort of job background and expertise that person needs to have. And as we're going out and recruiting, we're trying to recruit, more women, more Latino candidates, more African American candidates. If we know that that person is an architect and for whatever reason it doesn't know.
Architects are across the board, all races, genders. I
Well,
mean,
no, but so if we
I don't
have
see how that's relevant.
if we have a recommendation for somebody and we have a new opening on a board, we're trying to make sure that we can pull all of the people who have the specifications for that open board seat so that we have a more diverse
Okay.
group of candidates. As we're recruiting them in one area, we're able to also place them in others.
When you have these boards and commissions, like,
Yeah.
I know some colleagues recently created some boards and commissions. Like, say, for instance, it may be based on the specific issue, it may be a majority African American, if not total, right? So that may skew the numbers in the aggregate because you count that in the aggregate with all the numbers. So the question is, are there boards and commissions, and are you looking at the individual boards and commissions as you deal with the numbers in terms of the diversity of those boards and commissions?
In terms of the overall tracking right now, it's across all boards and commissions that we appoint to because of the way that we legally need to be able to collect the data from them and the way that we need to be able to track the disclosure of that information. And that's a law department question that I can get some more information about why we can't specifically track it to certain folks on those commissions at this time. But we'll be working to as we try to improve the database that we currently have to track who's on those boards and commissions in the same way that we're improving the way that we track who different employees are and how they identify.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Green.
Thank you, Council President. I had stepped out briefly when Councilman Parker was asking some questions regarding CAMA, and I just want to make sure I understand for the record that this is going to be delayed additional time.
Yep.
Yeah. So there were two parts to the answer. One was when we'll be doing regular assessments, and the other was when CAMA will be used for those assessments. So within the last week, we've reached a tentative agreement with the vendor who will implement CAMA for us. That was delayed because the prior vendor, after months of negotiation, kind of pulled out and went to work on a different project. So we're really kind of starting the implementation process with the vendor now. But that won't stop us from doing full assessments each year, really beginning once the commercial reassessment is done, within the next week or two. So we'll be doing those assessments. It won't be as efficient as it would have been if we had CAMA. It'll be clunkier, but we'll still be doing them.
So when you say not as efficient, what type of financial impact will that have on the city?
I don't think it'll have an impact on where the assessments wind up. It might mean that things like, one of the issues we have is that when an appeal is resolved, sometimes takes longer than we'd like for that information to get from BRT over to revenue. Those kind of issues will probably still be around until CAMA is in place. But I don't think there's a financial hit.
So you're saying it's going to impact us from an efficiency of transfer of information, but will it impact the city from its ability to successfully defend assessments for commercial properties?
No, it will not.
Okay. So, Mr. DeBell, let me just ask a question since you've been here for some time. When did we first start the CAMA discussion? When did we first start the CAMA discussion?
Well, there was discussion of CAMA, I think, back probably in the street administration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a discussion for a long time.
Right. So when did we start the contracting process for CAMA? It's kind of multiple answers there. Right? There was a whole different initiative to try to get to CAMA that kind of got right to the end and then kind of fell apart in prior administration, back when it was BRT rather than OPA. Right.
In terms of looking at doing a CAMA this time, probably started kind of serious contracting process probably about a year and a half ago in terms of getting out an RFP and negotiating with a potential vendor.
Okay, how does that compare to other cities?
I think most other large cities have a CAMA in place.
Right, and I'm assuming in your research and your work in city government, we've looked at other cities, and since the majority of other cities already have CAMA in place, just like the majority of other cities have best value, what was the time process generally has taken those cities to implement CAMA?
So the time frame has usually been in the kind of, from the point where we are now, probably like 2.5 years.
Right, but we're restarting again. So, I mean, and other cities also have transferred over multiple administrations. This seems like this issue keeps coming up. I know I've asked these questions, I know Councilman Doms asked these questions, and we are leaving money on the table in our inability to get this done properly.
Well, we're still going to be doing assessments every year. We're doing a commercial reassessment, so we're not leaving money on the table.
Now, hopefully.
Right.
But, I mean, I guess my concern, the frustration is that, going to the last administration, while CAMA's coming, it's going to address issues. Now we're in this administration, and we're having another setback. And I understand your perspective saying it's not going to impact us except for transfer of information from an efficiency standpoint, but I have a concern in reference to getting this implemented to make sure we have the revenues we have, the revenues that we need in the city of Philadelphia, considering all of the looming federal and state issues and concerns, and also the issue with the school district going forward in the coming fiscal years is a major issue that we need to prioritize and get it done properly.
Yep, and then we are committed to doing that. We were as frustrated as you are when the vendor walked away. It's not something that we could have controlled. That was what that delay was. And we want to do it right, and that's why, it's going to take a little time from now to get it in place, because we want to make sure it's done correctly.
So when that vendor walked away, I'm assuming at some point, prior, let me step back. At the point that vendor had walked away, had there been any actual contractual obligations between that vendor and the city of Philadelphia?
No.
So it's just been negotiations?
Correct.
Back and forth?
Yes.
No letter of intent, no document signed, no
Correct.
obligatory aspects?
That's right.
And you selected that initial vendor that backed away. How?
Sorry.
How did you come across that particular vendor? I'm sure there's other vendors you could have looked at. Why that vendor?
Went through an RFP process. Yes.
It was like that.
Yeah.
Okay. It just seems like this issue is somehow is an ongoing albatross around the city of Philadelphia that we, for some reason, cannot get fixed. Now, I'm hoping that we're going to go through commercial assessments and it's not going to impact us except for efficiency between transfer information between departments, but you don't really provide a lot of comfort considering the number of years that this issue has been going on. I literally moved from that chair over here to this chair here, and we're still dealing with the same issue.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences now is that we are at a place where we have this tentative agreement, so we have a vendor, one of the leading vendors in the industry, who's now going to be working with us to make sure this gets put in place, and they have a track record of success.
Okay. Well, I'll have additional questions come up during the budget process. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Councilman. And Chair recognizes Councilman Don.
Thank you, Council President. I want to follow up to my colleague, Councilman Green's question on the OPA for a minute. I guess there's really two ways of measuring values. One is through CAMA and one is manually through appraisers. And so, assuming we're not going to have CAMA till 2020 or 2021, on the residential side, I just want to put it out there, if OPA feels they need to hire more appraisers, they should come to us and tell us what they need so we can properly assess.
And we actually, you'll see in the budget this year, one of the things that we've been doing over the last year is making more progress in terms of hiring appraisers, and so that's been a good development too.
Okay, because I look at us as like a board of directors. So in 2014, the value of real estate in the city was $134 billion, of which $91 billion was billed, of $1.3 billion in revenues.
Right, 91 million was $91 billion was taxable.
Correct. The
Yes.
rest is non-taxable, let's just say, or in payment programs, or whatever.
Yeah.
But 91, which generated 1.3 billion roughly of revenue, of which we get 45%, the school gets 55%. But that hasn't changed dramatically in the last 3 years. And yet, no one can really argue with it. The market has changed at least 3% for the overall valuation, up and down in certain areas, but that's a general consensus in Philadelphia. And in fact, if you look at the appreciation rates, it's even higher than that. So in some ways, we could argue as a city that each year we should have received an extra $40 million just in real estate taxes, which we haven't gotten each year for the last 2 years. And I think that's some of the frustration that we're hearing from my colleagues. So if we can support this with manual appraisers, I think we'll hopefully get to that goal. That's not my questions, though, I just wanted to mention that. I have several questions. I hope I don't take. You can give me quick answers, though. Can I get a response? We had a bill last week, L&I bill. It's coming up for vote, I think, for $5.1 million. What I'd like to know is where that money's being spent, detail by detail, including the $450,000 for the Historical Commission, how that's being broken down. You don't have to give it to me now. Just get it to me before the vote.
Okay.
The second question I have, I'm not sure you can answer this now either, but I would just like to know, for the city of Philadelphia, the total debt we have as a city. Total debt.
We can get you that.
And then, because I asked this last year too, I went through my notes. And how much interest, you gave me some information last year.
I think we did send, yes.
Yeah, we got it.
Yeah.
How much do we pay in interest every year?
Yeah, it's actually, we can get, it's in the plan, actually.
So I'm looking at page 346, long-term obligations.
Yes.
But it goes up dramatically, which is worrying me. That's my concern. I'd like to know how much we pay in interest, what we pay in principal, And are we paying more right now in what are
It's
our
actually,
payments?
it's broken out. You can see it has interest on city long-term debt and principal on city long-term debt. So
I
it's
know.
broken out.
Go to the bottom of total class 700. It says fiscal year 17 estimate 153 million.
Yep.
But then it goes up to 22 of 220 million. Looks like a big jump.
Yeah, and you can kind of see over time where those increases are. Part of that is the rebuild borrowings. So the debt service on rebuild gets up to about 25 million. We also built in there, I think, 2 GO borrowings over time and the affordable housing bonds. So we have a number of borrowings, and so there's a reason for the increase.
But we're really saying, if I'm reading this correctly, you're the finance guy, in the next 5 years, are we increasing our debt by 50%?
We're increasing our debt service by about that much. Debt service goes over the life of the plan from about 6.5, 6.6% of obligations to about 7.7%. And this kind of goes back to the question we were talking about before, the trade-off between really essential investments in our infrastructure and looking at where our fixed costs are.
When you look at this chart, it just looks like we're incurring a lot more debt.
I understand.
That's what worries me a little. So I'd like to know, how much are we paying in principal each year in relationship to how much more we're borrowing? So where are we going financially?
So we can lay out the new borrowings and what they mean for principal interest payments.
A few more questions. On the additional positions, is it possible for us to get, when we hire new people in the plan and budget, can we be provided with a document showing the total number of new positions by department? And if this helps us meet any of our minority women, disabled business standards, and what will be the cost, this is the real key, for health benefits, fringe benefits, and the effect on the fund balance?
Yeah. So the budget, there's a list in the plan of positions by department, but when you get the budget detail, it'll actually show you which position, so you can see kind of position by position what we're anticipating increases will be. For the departments with program-based budgeting, you'll be able to see the benefit impact too.
Is there any way to have one sheet that talks about all the new people we're going to be adding in this budget and what that impact is to the pension and other benefits?
We can try and summarize that, yeah.
Okay. Then on public safety, just a quick question. We're adding 30 more firefighters, that's great, 30 more paramedics, 5 new medic units, 12 new paramedics, decrease the fire department. The question is, how does this decrease the overtime by adding these new people?
And we can have the fire commissioner come up and help answer that. But some of this will be to help. There's sort of 2 issues there. One is that we need to build up some level of relief factor, which it will take us some time to get to, because just by the nature of the fire department's practices, you have to have a certain number of people staffing the ambulances, staffing the different apparatus. So it'll take us some time to get there. This we look at, particularly on the paramedic side, the investments will be, we have a considerable number of times where we need to make sure we're responding quickly to emergencies, and it's very difficult based on the current level of staffing to get there. And so we look at the investment is to sort of help stabilize over time, but also as a way to really better respond to emergencies that we see.
So I think what you're saying, bottom line, is there's no overtime savings. We're just trying to do a better job.
I think we hope there will be. I think what's hard is to quantify that. I think we look at this as a way of kind of eventually getting there. We've seen a decrease in overtime this year because we've increased staffing levels. It takes 6 months for firefighters to be trained. So even once we've hired them, we won't necessarily see an immediate reduction in overtime. It's just the nature of this. So we'll see it over the long term. I think it's hard in FY18 to see a considerable reduction because it will take some time to get these firefighters on board. But we do look at this as a way of kind of not only improving the performance, but also eventually stabilizing overtime and bringing it down eventually. But it will take us some time.
Another question, have we done any consideration of doing a study by department to look at our processes and how technology can enhance our operations? Because I don't believe the city of Philadelphia is really embracing technology the way other municipalities are or businesses are. We have a lot of older systems, and I think it's hard, by the way, to change. I think it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have to have really expert people from the outside come in and show us. And sometimes we do things that we don't need to do. And yet, I'll give you an example in commerce. I think we should have in the Commerce Department a website where you go on, you click on restaurant, and it tells you exactly what you have to do, how to open it, what licenses, what every little detail, or barber shops, or whatever it is. So we can actually, I think, cut our overhead by embracing more technology. And the question is, how do we do this department by department?
And I think, and I'm sure the OIT Commissioner could come up and talk a little bit about how the process worked for developing what the projects were in the capital program, as well as in the operating budget. But I know they went through a fairly rigorous process with the departments, not only getting requests from departments coming in, but analyzing those to make sure that they could understand the need and then trying to prioritize them in such a way. We talked about this a little bit before. It's hard to kind of make sure that we need to do process improvements as well as building the technology. It's sort of these two things have to happen in partnership. And I know that Charlie's been working with the department.
But otherwise, like we're just putting Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. I'll give you an example that we talked about last year. I don't know that we've done anything yet, but we send out how many water bills every month in the mail? And we send out real estate tax bills. We probably send out 500,000 water bills. There's 579,000 properties in the city, but land doesn't have water usually, right? So we probably send out 500,000 or so water bills every month, and we send out 579,000 tax bills. Other cities have automated that process. Not everybody can do it, but 75% of your population can get those bills automated. That saves $4 to $5 million a year. It's a small amount, but nickels and dimes add up. So what are we doing in that area right now?
Yeah, I'm Charlie Brown. I'm the CIO, Councilman. On that particular issue, that RFP is just about ready to go. It's been pushed through a lot of agencies, including the Water Department, and the water billing issue, which I know you're very interested in, is actually in Appendix 2, that RFP. It should go out very, very shortly, so that'll be in there. It's actually lumped with e-pay services, which, again, we have one e-pay vendor, and we would like to expand that to multiple e-pay vendors. Every year we do see more money coming in via the web, which is a big deal for us. And I do kind of agree with much of what you said. A lot of the money that we get goes toward fixing old infrastructure. It does. But it's what kind of keeps the city running. We have an awful lot of not only old systems out there, but old equipment out there. But I will tell you that there's a lot of things going on which are frankly invisible to you. For example, like right now we're rolling out a whole new phone system in the city. We're changing everything to VoIP and moving over. And every time we do this, it's not without pain. It always is a painful way to go. But it's always better for the city kind of when we get over. Another thing that we're moving forward, we're going to move the entire city, including city council right now, we're going to move it to Office 365. It's the first time ever in the history of the city, we will, all of us, be on the same platform. A real productivity gain for everybody. So, we try to keep up all the old stuff, and you're right, there's a ton of it. And we also try to move ahead where we can. So I do understand, what you're saying. And these large projects, though, as painful as it is for you to watch them from the outside, you should be on the inside. It is a very long, it is a very long and painful process from RFP to get to the end. It really is. And one of the problems we've run into is that many of these systems were built. They were built custom years ago. Custom. That stuff doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't. You and I, you've even brought this up. This is the first time that this administration, the capital budget, we're going to force people into packages. We almost have to, because that's how we got into the mess that we're in now. We have to get out of that. And I think you and I both agree on that.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, by the way. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair recognizes Councilman Heenan.
That's a quick comment and statement as opposed to a line of questioning. But VoIP, just want to let everybody know that's voice over internet. So that's good. And so everybody knows that we are bringing ourselves up to some technology. And if I could, just a message to our OIT department and some of the things that we have going on with our capital investments in technology. There's a lot going on, and they take a long time. When the department comes up during our budget hearings, please talk about some of the things that have been taking place and some of in the timelines and the schedules that are going to come due, and some of the other some of the challenges that we have and let us know, why there's a little bit of a delay, but that you recognize it and that you're working on it. This way, we on the other side here as a legislative body don't have to continue to interrogate, as opposed to understand that, some systems are being changed or in the process of a transition, and some systems, still, are operating under the DOS systems or floppy disks, and if there's a reason why we can't change, just to let us know, because I don't want a public perception to be that we're not doing anything. All right, we have enough of a public image, with city government, and it's lack of at times it's lack of confidence. That we have a lot going on, and that we're changing the face of how government interacts with its constituents. And I know we do that individually as council members, and we try to be creative, and we are engaging with our citizens, but that the city is also doing that, because if you're working on some good stuff, we want to hear it, right? And if we still have a system that is named the Whopper from the movie War Games, well then let's just mention it, and then say, hey, it'll be offline shortly, and we are now going over to switching over to voice over internet so we can better connect with our constituents. That's just advice as we move forward to this long process over the next 2 months. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. That was actually a good movie, War Games. That was a good movie. I like that. Chair recognizes Councilman Dom for, as he says, one last question.
One statement, one question.
All right.
We talked about lead poisoning. I just want to make sure that we lead by example, that we have actually inspected all of our city-owned properties to make sure none of our properties have any of this issue going on with regards to lead poisoning. That's just a statement. And the second is, I know that Mike D was here earlier. I don't know if he's still here, but I just want to mention that he's been very cooperative in working with me on this, that we have 25 to 30 properties that do not use PGW. And so here we are a city, we own our own real estate, and we own our own utility company, and we use a different utility company. And so I'm going to use the Art Museum as an example. The costs, they're all over the range, but lately they've been $20 million to convert and potentially $1.5 to $2 million in revenue, which is a 7.5% to 10% return depending on how it boils out. But the big return is the asset value it adds to PGW, which few people understand. Adding $2 million in revenue to PGW at a 5 cap is adding $40 million of value into that entity. So the more we can convert prisons and any properties owned by the city to PGW, the more valuable we make that utility. And God forbid, I'm just going to bring it up, if we ever have a crisis, you want that utility to be as valuable as possible. Thank you. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. Actually, you'll see some interesting information coming about conversions relatively soon. But I agree, that's a very, very significant opportunity for us. There appears to be no additional questions, so we better get out of here before some more members come downstairs. I want to thank you very much for your testimony. Real briefly, maybe a little different, we'd actually like to call you back near the end of the process so we can, after talking to the various departments, to get an assessment, may or may not, but I noticed over the last couple of years, we needed to get an assessment of the 5-year plan after we've actually talked to some departments. But we'll let you know, we'll coordinate that.
Okay.
Thank you. There being none, this committee will stand in recess until Wednesday, March 29th, 10 a.m., which time we will reconvene in room 400, City Hall. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.